All right, folks. It's definitely a Wednesday afternoon. Yours truly here, Mark the Blues Man Lee is what some folks call me, but definitely enjoying another exciting edition of the online dinner party. We will be having mystery guests appearing in terms of some clues and all of that. So I hope that folks will be watching and checking that out and trying to figure out who these mystery guests might be. But I've got to let y'all know that you might not be able to figure it out, or you might be in for a surprise and able to figure it out quite easily. But we're going to see how this all plays out and if y'all are able to figure out my mystery guest on this particular afternoon. You know, a lot of things are happening in our community. A lot of things are going on, and we're trying to figure out what's going to be happening in regards to that. Even though Biden has been elected president and all the news media sources are saying that, some folks are still stubborn and don't want to go ahead and concede, even though it's been more than a week since those results were put out. So, like I said, we're having some folks in 1600 that are being very stubborn, still trying to find some thousands, and I do mean tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, of lost votes so that they can hopefully, in their mind, stay for a second term. Not something that I'm rooting for, but that's something that they're rooting for. And of course, we still got sports going on. I know I watched a couple of football games and things of that nature. And then, of course, we've still got things going on in relationships to events. I know that I was part of a Black Business Expo, had a chance to meet a lot of great people and hoping some of them might even pop in here doing this show on this particular afternoon and tell you some of the things that they've got going on in their lives. So a lot of things are happening in our world. And of course, everybody is paying attention to their economy, their personal economy, as well as trying to stay healthy and trying to stay safe as we're in this age of a pandemic. So a lot of these things are going on and a lot of these things are continuing to go on. So like I said, I know a lot of folks are waiting for their stimulus package if there's going to be another wave of those, and who knows when that'll be coming. And a lot of folks are also trying to figure out what was going on in terms of vaccines and things of that nature. I do understand that a company that has some ties to North Carolina, Pfizer, is on the fast track to one of those discoveries and all, and we'll see whether that happens and what the results are in that regard. So that's some of the things that are going on here in this area in North Carolina. But of course, a number of things are happening around the world. Wherever you're watching in the world, I hope that you'll be able to tell us what you've got going on and what you're doing and how folks can be learning more about the events and the things that are happening in your life. I know a lot of folks are always interested in that, interested in finding out more and more about what they can do in their world. So definitely interested to hear from y'all and find out what's going on in your part of the globe, be that someplace like Australia, be that someplace like Malaysia, be that someplace like a number of other great places that are out there. So very much curious to find out what y'all have got going on and what y'all are doing in your world, because a lot of things are happening in our lives. So of course, I love to hear what folks are doing. By the way, we had some very interesting conversation with some great folks earlier this week on some of our other shows. I know I had the pleasure of talking to Stephanie Espy, who's involved in the world of trying to get more women in STEM jobs. So that was really great hearing her conversation and all of that. So definitely was truly amazing hearing what she had going on in that regard. And then also had the pleasure of talking to Precious Lee, no relation, but she's very much involved in filmmaking as well as audio engineering and a number of other things. So that was definitely some great conversation that was held in that particular place. So looking forward to having more conversations with more folks and all of that. Also heard from a young lady, Chanel Hill, who had done interior designing for none other than President Obama when he was in office. So she was sharing some of those experiences that she went to doing that. So definitely was great having that conversation with her and seeing what she was doing in that regard. And then, of course, there were a number of other powerful interviews that were held on Monday as well. So all kinds of great conversations that have happened over the last couple of days here on IBM TV. So definitely hope that many of you will go back and check out some of those interviews so that you can see what was going on in those regards. But that's what's happening here. I know a lot of folks are probably planning for their Thanksgiving activities, and I do know that in many cases, it's going to be scaled down Thanksgiving. A lot of folks might be staying at home with even only a few people as opposed to maybe 10, 15, 20, or even more than that. Because we do know that a lot of folks are definitely concerned and are trying to do a more scaled down version of the holidays, be that Christmas, be that Thanksgiving, be that even Diwali, which I understand was a holiday that was just taking place in India recently. So a lot of folks are doing scaled down versions of their holidays in order to stay safe in this pandemic era that we are living in. So those are some of the things that are happening in our community and with our community. So definitely wanted to share those with you and hear what your thoughts were as we continue to move along and talk about all kinds of great and amazing things that are happening here in this world. Like I said, there are a lot of things that are going on, and we're looking forward to hearing from our listeners as to what they've got going on in their world. There was so much knowledge that was being passed on doing several things that I have attended or been involved with. As a matter of fact, earlier today, I had a Zoom call with a student from Appalachian State. That student was doing a piece on community radio. And yes, I am involved in community radio in addition to being involved with IBM TV. So they were doing a piece on that. So I had a pleasure to share with them some of the stories of growing up in radio in the town of Warrenton when my parents started a small radio station that was definitely community based there in Warrenton and touched on a lot of things. Them being big jazz fans, they wanted to make sure that jazz was getting representation as it was not getting that much during at that time on the airwaves. So they went and formed their own radio station in the mid to late 70s that was on for a little bit over 10 years. So I was sharing a little bit of that story with him, as well as a little bit of the things that are going on in relationship to community radio now. It is my feeling that sometimes that personality aspect of radio has been something that has been lacking from both on our commercial side, where we know it can be very homogenous, and you might hear the same thing in Manhattan, New York, that you would hear in, say, Dallas, Texas, or in Oakland, California, because a lot of times it's the same two or three companies that are running these radio stations and TV stations and other media outlets. That's one of the things about IBM TV is trying to get us to do things and think outside of the box, because we're thinking outside of the box and creating some new avenues for folks to have their voice heard. Because too often the voices are not heard because there are so many limited options in terms of commercial networks and all of that. So this is a chance for folks like me, Brandon, and others, the gentleman with Mind Closet as well, and several others to have their voice heard here on this network. So definitely I'm glad to be part of the network, glad to be part of what is going on here on a regular basis. But that's just part of the reason of it being such a powerful force. So like I said, I was talking to the student from Appalachian State. I think he's going to be talking to others around the community radio field. And once he's done, he'll get back in touch with me, and hopefully we'll share parts of that interview with you here as well. Like I said, one of the stations I'm at is WCOM, and that's over there in Carborough. It's definitely a 100-watt wonder, doesn't have that strong of a signal, but it also is on the internet. So because of the power of the internet, even small signal stations can get around the world and be heard. So that's one of the things that I was doing earlier today. Like I said, last week was very much involved with the Black Business Expo and definitely seeing a lot of great speakers there. Folks like Fran Harris, who is a entrepreneur out of Dallas, Texas, has her own energy drink and is a former WNBA player. I'm hoping that I'll be able to bring her here for some interviews in the very near future, as well as Dominique Hart, who's doing a lot of very powerful work. And there was also a young lady named Precious, who is seen as one of the master pitch people in the country. So those were some of the folks. And of course, motivational speaker George Frazier. So a lot of folks like that who are spreading their knowledge and their wealth of knowledge, some of them being national. I think just about everybody I named was national, but there were local folks that were also talking as well. So I do remember people that were on that platform that included folks like Letitia Nicole, as well as Maxine Earl McCoy. So definitely folks like that were on there. And these are folks that are more locally based, but they have a lot to say. And of course, we heard from officials from the kind of the government level. My friend, Mary Stover, who was on. So it was good hearing from her. I've known her and her family for a number of years. So definitely was glad to see that they were involved as well. So definitely it was great, and an amazing conversation was had by many in that regard. But you know, sometimes you also have the pleasure of interviewing folks and then they come back at you with some information. So, like I said, on the radio show with Mark Lee, we had the pleasure of talking to none other than Miranda Berry and, of course, Kuyata, who was one of the actors as well as the director of Turning 15 on the Road to Freedom. And then after doing that, we heard from none other than Steve Rao. You know, of course, he is a politician here in this area who has been here on our network, but has also shared a lot of wisdom with us and all of that. But then yesterday, I had the pleasure of being on a Zoom call, and I met the folks that were tied in to that particular production, including some of those that are in the field of education, as well as the lady whose the story is about. That's right, Miss Lowry is now in her 70s, and she said a thing that I thought was very fascinating. She was talking about we need to bring the human back into humanity, and I couldn't agree with her more. But one of the things I did is they let me to talk to her and even do like a little bit of an interview with her and all. So I'm going to share a little bit of that with you. Unfortunately, that quote about human and humanity is not in this particular interview, but I'm going to share with you a little bit about what we did and how we did it. And hopefully you'll find this woman to be as fascinating as I found her to be. So looking forward to bringing that to you right now. So if y'all will hold on one second, we got to bring that up and see if we can't let y'all hear a little excerpt of this interview. Like I said, it was a very powerful interview in my mind, and I think that y'all will find it quite interesting and all of that. So definitely about to bring that in, and hopefully we'll have a little bit of a take of so what this was all about. Like I said, I think y'all will find this to be a quite fascinating interview, and I'm hoping that once I get it up, that y'all will enjoy it totally and enjoy what is being said.
That they belong to. That was how we were a community. I know the community.
Well, hold on one second. That didn't quite work. It looks like we might have accidentally stopped it, which is not what I wanted to do. So I'm going to bring it right back up, and we're going to keep it running along and all. So if y'all will hold on one second, we will bring it back up and let y'all hear the full interview as it goes on. So like I said, I'm going to bring it back to the beginning and let y'all check it out.
That was how we were a community. I know the community that I often talk about growing up in is the GWC homes. And everybody in my community was the same color. But everybody in my community cared for everybody else. And I know that's kind of hard these days, but when you meet somebody, to me, you automatically know if you gonna like them or dislike them. And you often, there are so many things out there that is wrong. And you're not the only person that sees the thing that is wrong. So you're not going to be the only person out there that wants to change this wrong thing. And to me, that's how you do it.
Great, Linda. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that. Dr. Henderson, before we go to Mark, who will be next, can you comment on that idea of creating community? Tell us a little bit about facing history in ourselves and how that helps to create just this kind of community that Linda was talking about.
Absolutely. We always start with identity. Every case study, our scope and sequence starts with identity. So what Ms. Lowry was saying about getting to know the other people or the other person is one of the best ways to start contracting and setting norms for how you want your community to act, move, to live together, even in the classroom. And so what teachers can do is they can get to know their students and allow students to get to know each other. We have tons of identity resources. We even actually have a study of identity and community in a middle school curriculum. And we have an advisory curriculum that's called Community Matters. So absolutely, that's the nail on the head, is being able to build community through learning each other's identities. And like Ms. Lowry said, not just the surface level, but what's your story? Because everyone has a story. Yeah. We got a chance to get a glimpse of Ms. Lowry's story through the play and through the book, but that identity piece is huge. And in fact, Dr. Gholdy Muhammad in Cultivating Genius has said that identities and histories are the ways that we get to build a more humane society.
Wow.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dr. Henderson. Okay, Mr. Mark Lee, Take it away.
All right, I'll definitely take it away. Have all kinds of interesting questions for everybody. I've been watching and everything. So, Miss Lowry, one thing is I've decided that I'm going to borrow your hashtag because I think that it needs to be the hashtag for the world of putting human back in humanity, because I think that that needs to be a hashtag to go out across Twitter and all of the Facebook world, because I'm gonna do my part to try to put that out there. Because as I heard that, I was going like, if that's not a hashtag, it needs to be one, because I think that that's something that we need to do on a deep level. So I'm just gonna let you know that I'm gonna put that out there, that we need to put human in humanity. As Miranda knows, one of the things that I'm a big fan of is music, and I know that music played an important part in what was going on in the movement. So
Oh,
the question I've got for you, Miss Lowry, and then I've got a couple of questions for my educators, is how can we get what was some of your favorite music and music songs during the movement time? I know I've got some personal favorites, but I was wondering what yours was.
every day, every morning I woke up, whether it was in our home or in jail, I woke up with my mind stayed on freedom, and that really is my favorite song. Um, and We Shall Overcome. It still is my calming song. It would calm my spirit down. And even now, at the age of 70, when I'm facing something that makes me shake inside, or makes me nervous or anxious, uh, it could be, uh, it could just be anything I can think of, and I'll start humming, We Shall Overcome. And I find myself laughing at it then a lot of times, because I know I can do this. That's what that song meant to me at, at 15, 14 and 15. And that's what it means to me at 70 and all through the years. But I I can't think of any other favorite songs. I mean, I love them all. Anything. We had one song, and I can't sing, but it was like da 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 da, and I find myself just sitting sometimes going da 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 da, and laughing, And if you come to my house, I'm here by myself, and you hear me going and singing, and people will say something's wrong with her, but I'm having a good time with remembering now some of the good times from from that time period. And it was the songs, and I met some good people too,
Wow.
you know.
Yeah, some great
Yeah.
songs that you just highlighted and everything. I was going to tell you before I get to Dr. Henderson and everything, the other thing that really captured me with what you had said earlier, because I was listening on the Zoom before coming into the panels and everything, was you talked about the fact of sometimes our young activists get too caught up in that kind of like 2 weeks of fame kind of period, where they need to understand that the movement goes beyond, I think you said 2 weeks on CNN. So that really captured me when you said that, because I know too often we do find folks that are involved in that limelight, but they don't necessarily continue with the struggle. So the fact that you even captured that thought is something that I know a lot of folks are oftentimes concerned about, even in the education field. So I'm now going to ask Dr. Henderson a question, which is a lot of my friends and everything are oftentimes complaining about the fact that they don't see enough of these stories like Miss Lowry and like others in our school system. How can we get more of these in the school system? Because like I said, we know the heroes. We know we can go all the way back to Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman, the Martin Luther Kings and the Malcolm X's, but we don't see enough of the stories of the true foot soldier. So how can we actually get folks in our school systems throughout the country, and I would argue throughout the world, to be engaged in learning these powerful stories that shape the movements that we're in now, whether that's Me Too, whether that's Black Lives Matter, or a number of others. So I don't even think that a lot of those leaders know these stories the way that they should. So I'd love to know your thoughts as to how we can get more folks involved in that.
Thank you so much. That That question is making my heart beat fast because I'm so excited about the answer. I listened to a webinar with Jacqueline Woodson the other day, and she said that young people are writing it right now, right? Like you're living in a movement. So they don't have to wait to read about what happened in those other movements. They definitely need to research it. They need to know whose shoulders they're standing on. They need to not, if they're not getting it in the classrooms, they need to look for it. They need to ask their relatives, their stories. Some of them are in a pandemic and in sheltering in place with people who have all kinds of history locked inside of them. My grandmother was 101 years old before she passed. How many stories are there with folks who lived through these times? But then even right now, what Ms. Woodson said, Jacqueline said, is that students, when they're writing on Twitter, when they're writing on social media, they are still capturing their stories. This is archiving. So it may not look the same when they're talking about and telling the history of, but they need to write their histories because they're living in a movement right now. History is happening, right? And the second part is that teachers need to give them the tools to do that, right? So teach them the histories, but also give them the tools, show them how writing can look a bunch of different ways, that it can be nonfiction, that it can be fiction, that it can be articles, that it can be a caption on a picture, that it can be non-text, right? So that it can be a play, it can be a poem, it can be a rap, it can be a song, so that we don't limit what this history looks like. I love that the executive directors and the writers of this book and this play have made it three-dimensional, right? That they made it to where you don't just imagine what Miss Larry might have seen on that bridge, but you get to see them standing, right? I had the privilege of visiting, the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and oh my goodness, the feeling that you get just being in that space, the proximity of it is amazing. But even what you all were able to do with the play, with Miss Nora being able to embody the Miss Lowry like that, you get to see Miss Lowry in all of these different stages of her life. And I think because kids learn different ways, that you can't put everything they need to know in a history book. They may not ever get it, right? I didn't consider myself that kind of student. I was the artsy, craftsy, musical, all of that. And I think that students can learn through the music, they can learn through the plays, they can learn through the history books as well, but you gotta give them variety.
No, I agree with you on that. And one thing I was going to add to that is that I know that here in Durham, North Carolina, which is where I'm based at, we just lost one of our great historical icons, which was a guy named Skippy Scarborough, who was definitely a historical figure and knew all the history of Black Wall Street. And we lost a lot of other people that have been like that. And they didn't have, in some cases, enough of their stuff written in archives, which is what you're suggesting. And even if they've had it written in archives, because I'm thinking about a gentleman I know named Jim Fields that had a lot of video footage of a lot of historic moments. His family's got those videos sitting in their household, and nobody is doing anything with them because they don't want to release it. And a lot of the folks that would like it don't even know if it still exists. So my question to Mr. Rivers is, we have a very enlightening and a very wonderful Black theater community. I sometimes feel that we don't do enough archiving even in our own theater community. So I'd like to hear some of your reflections on ways that we can even archive the things that are going on in our theatrical community, because you are a major person in that community. And I've got other friends like Garland Thompson that are also involved in that. And I remember the Garland that I'm referring to, Garland Sr., just recently passed.
Well, Dr. Henderson hit something that also reminds me very much of what I do. I've been in this, I've been around for 7 decades. And during that time, there were many stories that were told, the history, understanding where I came from, understanding the reputation of the community that I grew in with, had a global reputation of being the cultural capital of Black America. And all of those who preceded before me, I got a chance to read about, because the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, the largest repository of Black literature and culture, was only 2 blocks from where I lived. And as a young student of junior high school, I was able to go to that Schomburg and hear those stories. Jane Baldwin lived 3 blocks from me. Langston Hughes lives 7 blocks from me. So for me, what I'm committed to is telling the story today and yesterday, side by side. I have a Fannie Lou Hamer story. I have a Martin Luther King story. I have an Adam Clayton Powell story. Almost every leader that you can mention, we have produced their stories and brought it to the schools and to the children. And this is another example of a story that can resonate all over the world, not only in this country, but it needs to go beyond. When I heard stories from other countries coming into New York or into Harlem, I decided that this is just a resting place on a road to multiple communities all across the country. And that's what our job is. And that's clearly what my job is at New Heritage Theater.
Yep. And I'd love to hear from both Mary and Christina as well, because I'm oftentimes thinking that a lot of times the conversation needs to go to not just us sharing our own stories, meaning African Americans sharing their stories, but also going to other cultures. And it seems to me that that's part of what y'all have been doing in your own work and everything. So I guess I'll go with Mary in the middle and then come to Christina as they can talk about ways that we can address getting the messages to other people that are parts of not just whatever culture is producing the work, but getting it to other groups so that we all are part of that greater humanity that Linda was talking about.
Gosh, what a great question. And I think that that's something that in our work, we are part of Miami-Dade County, so we're a government entity, and we have just this great opportunity to work with young people. But we're in Miami, which is one of the most culturally diverse and rich parts of our country, and we have such amazing stories that are coming from right within our community. And we want to lift them up, to be heard, to share and to communicate with one another, and not just when we're looking at planning a season. We don't look at it as in, well, we need to do something that's going to speak to this community and something that's going to speak to this community. We want to speak to all communities because we all have something to give. We all have something to learn from one another. We just want to make sure that those voices are represented on stage and that we are engaging with the communities at a really meaningful level. Christina, you want to add to that?
Yes, thank you, Mary Margaret. I would say as a presenter and also speaking directly to the educators, our youth, they have so much to say. They have a voice. They want to be heard. They don't want to just be spoken to. They want to be given the opportunity to speak up. So that's one thing I definitely want to mention is give them the opportunity, listen to them, find out from them what they want to learn, because they do have a lot to say. And in addition to what Mary Margaret was saying, which my thought just escapes me right now, but instead of always going for the easy presentation, the easy performance, what is expected, go ahead and think a little bit outside the box. And I think as a presenter or as presenters, that's what Mary Margaret and I look for. Instead of looking for that performance that we know will appeal to everybody, we try to think a little bit outside the box and look for a story that will not only entertain, but will educate. And it will teach a lesson, or it will teach about history, or will teach something, such as turning 15 on the road to freedom. So I think that's something we always look to find something through the arts that we know people will appreciate, that definitely has a message and a positive message. So that's my piece.
And if I just wanted to say one more quick thing, we are looking for those stories that don't get told. Those stories that exist. We know there exists. Ms. Lowry's story is a perfect example. Everybody knows certain stories. We've been taught a version of history that is full of certain stories that we know all about on some level. And so we're looking for those that are not told all the time. And that's what we're really passionate about bringing to the stage.
Yeah, definitely. That was a great way that you phrased that and everything, because I do sometimes feel that too often we only get kind of the watered down version of history and not the true history that goes on. And so much of our history is bypassed, whether it's some of the stories that have been told within the civil rights struggle that we haven't heard enough about, or even some of the histories that have been totally bypassed. Like I have some Native American blood, and I know that that's totally been almost totally left out of the history books and things along that line, unless you get the very negative parts of it. By the way, Kuyate, I had the great pleasure of doing the interview with you yesterday. Got a chance to see you perform today. That was an amazing performance and all. So I just wanted to let you know that I was really impressed with your performance, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of your work in the very near future. So definitely just wanted to let you know that I was really enjoying your performance. And I've got all kinds of other questions, but I'm not going to take over the whole interview unless Miranda tells me
Thank
to.
you, Mark. You
I
brought up.
definitely love this whole platform. So Miranda, I'm turning it back over to you.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you for your questions. And I think we're running out of time. We have two people here. One is Mr. Garrett Nolan. I'm so glad that you came and joined this, because I think it's really important that we also get to hear something.
Yeah, that was some of the interview that I had the pleasure of doing with Miss Lowry, and that was a great interview that we had the pleasure of doing on Zoom yesterday. And like I said, she was the person that was featured on the subject of turning 15 on the road to freedom. And now she's in her 70s and all of that. So she is now still involved in terms of being the subject of this play and all. And you heard a chance a little bit to hear her speaking about music and the importance of music to her. I shared a little bit of what I'd heard in the Zoom before joining the Zoom platform in terms of being a panelist and having a chance to interview her and some of the educators and others. But right now we're getting ready to continue and move on along with some other great interviews. I see we've got another guest in the house, and of course, you know, it's the online dinner party, and we love having guests all the time. So I'm going to bring in Stevie B, and we're going to talk about a little bit about what they've got going on in their music career and what's going on in their life. So Stevie, glad that you were able to join me. Like I said, it's the online dinner party, and like I told you online, we just kind of like sit back, get chance to meet a lot of different folks, find out what their story is, what their life has been about, and kind of the things that they have been involved in. So if you'll share with our audience, which is actually a global audience, IBM TV is actually a platform that was put together by Nicholas Palveda and Kim Calhoun and a number of others, and they air throughout the country and throughout the world, because I know we've got listeners in South Africa, India, Malaysia, and a number of other places. So I'm sure that they would love to hear a little bit about your story and what you're all about. So I'm turning it over to you so they can learn a little bit more about you and what you're all about in your life.
Well, Mark, it's a pleasure to join you. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Stevie B, as you've already introduced me, and I've been involved in the entertainment business just about my entire life, both as a performer many years ago, and also on the other side of the desk in the business, both as a music publisher. Currently, I've owned an entertainment promotion and marketing company for over 30 years now. We've done quite well over the years. We're hired by record labels and not hired by artists. And so far, we've accumulated 23 gold and platinum record awards. So I have quite a strong track record in the industry. In addition to that, I've done music production. I've produced people such as Madonna, LA Star, and other people throughout the years. And on the side, when I'm not busy with the music business, I write. I've had several books published, hundreds of different music reviews, features, articles, etc. And so that pretty much sums up what I do here.
Sounds great. And you're doing some amazing work there. I mean, you named some folks that you've worked with, and I know a lot of folks have been really excited by the music business, but we also know the music business has found some very hard times with what's going on with the pandemic. So how have you been able to survive in these hard times that we're dealing with? Because I know I've got a good friend of mine that actually lives nearby. He does one of our shows here on IBM TV, and he's a funk musician, but you know, he's not been doing as many gigs because of what's going on. He's also an Uber driver. So right now he's spending more time doing the Ubering than he is with his music.
Well, we've actually been busier than ever now. And so it really hasn't halted us in any form or fashion. We're not involved in performing, the performing aspect of it. So we don't deal with venues or live performances. So the lockdown that everybody's been going through hasn't affected us. And it seems like more than ever, more musicians have been releasing records than ever before. In fact, several weeks ago, Billboard had an article out about how there are over 100 different releases. I think it's something like 190 releases going for ads into radio rotation in a given week, which was the largest they've ever seen in the history of surveying radio. And so on the area that I'm involved with, which is promotion and marketing, which means typically record labels and artists come to me after they've finished their product and then hire us to get the word out about the product out there. That seems to be in high demand, and the amount of content out there people looking for to promote has risen incredibly since the lockdown. Back in I think that started in March.
Right.
But in addition to that, I mean, just in general, one of the keys we find success over the years, the decades we've been in business, is we're quite diverse. We, besides just radio promotion, press promotion, we also provide we have an advertising department. We provide social media management and marketing. We're involved in retail, both physical and digital retail of entertainment products, and several dozen different other services. So that's part of the key, I think, to staying in business is if you just do one or two things, they're either in fashion or out of fashion. And so you'll always want to have something that a large enough portfolio of services to offer so that you can constantly bring in business when one area slows down, you accelerate in the other areas.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know even on the IBM TV platform, they've been talking about trying to diversify some of the product and not just doing shows, but doing some things around commerce and things of that nature so they can tie in and have more money engaged and then able to keep things afloat. What has it been like in terms of like meeting and working with some of these major stars? You mentioned Madonna, you mentioned a number of others. So how did they learn about Stevie B and how did they wind up coming to you? I'm imagining that they already knew that you put out a very quality product, so that's probably what brought them to you. But I just wondered if you could share some of those stories as to how some of these famous folks came to you and maybe some other names that you might want to mention.
Well, for instance, Madonna wasn't famous when we first met. And I was in those days, I was producing for Epic Records, and I was producing a dance project. And my arranger, who was David Frank, he used to be part of a group called The System back in the day, if you remember The System. I think their biggest hit was Coming to America, the soundtrack for Eddie Murphy's film. And essentially, he would always bring her into sessions as a backup singer. And we got along well. I was just taken by her professionalism. She was always showing up on time, no problems, just came in, learned her parts, laid down the tracks, got paid and left, which to me is the perfect backup musician. Right. And so a lot of times when you're producing for a large label, they'll have the studio time booked out that they'll give the producers, and we may not be able to fill up the studio time, so we'll have extra hours that can be utilized. So a lot of people I worked with who I thought had a potential, but yet were not signed, I would offer the free studio time when I found out there were going to be free hours in the studio, and let them come in to cut their own stuff that I would produce for them, with the understanding that, here's what we'll do is we'll cut this and you can use it as a demo. I get the rights to market it later on. Obviously, there was a written agreement between everybody I worked with and myself. And as in the case of Madonna, we did, I think, 20-some tracks together we laid down over a period of time. And she took some of those tracks over to Seymour Stein at Elektra Records, and they gave her her first record deal, and based upon the demos that we cut there. And so after she hit it big through Elektra, and after they started putting their resources behind her, I had the rights to license that material globally, which I did, and have done so nonstop throughout the years.
Wow.
So
definitely.
That was just, I'd say, just as an example of one person, but
Right.
Sorry, it's a long story there, but a lot of details.
No, I think a lot of folks are enjoying those kind of stories, and a lot of times folks don't recognize what goes on. Actually, a good friend of mine, and you may have known her, I don't know how, I know she was up there in the New York area, and she just recently passed away, but I've known her for years, and that was Catrice Barnes. And Catrice Barnes, of course, was involved as a background musician for a number of years, but was also the music director for Saturday Night Live, and then lost her battle recently in terms of fighting cancer and everything. But I was known her, we kind of grew up in that same time frame. So she was around the small town in Warrenton in like the late 70s, early 80s, and then moved to New York, where she spent the majority of the rest of her life.
You're right. No, I have a great deal of admiration for studio musicians. I used to be one myself back in when I first got to New York in the 70s. That was the first, I was around 77, and it was the first year or so that the record companies started running in the red. Prior to that, for decades, they were always making money hand over fist, but they kind of got a slap in the face from reality about you can't put out the same stuff over and over again and expect to sell it. And so the labels weren't signing artists at that time when I came to New York. And so to make ends meet and to keep a roof over my wife's head, my own head there, I did a lot of work as a studio musician since I could read music and pick up quickly on what was needed there. And so I just, recognize what dedication that takes and how difficult it is too. And so I always admire people who do that as a profession. One of my recent clients for promotion and marketing was Ava Cherry. I just wrapped up a record with Ava the past year. Ava, for decades, was a backup singer for David Bowie, worked extensively with Luther Vandross, Curtis Mayfield, and released records with them and on their labels. And we just did two different campaigns, back-to-back campaigns. One, she was doing a tribute to Bowie. She was covering his hit Let's Dance. And then she had a follow-up single to that called Testified for Love. And we worked those to radio and press and got some very nice response for Ava. So, I always have a soft spot in my heart for backup, session musicians.
Yeah, definitely. I can see that and everything. What do you think? Because I often have conversations with friends of mine that are in the music business, and including some friends that are in the radio business. And sometimes they complain that they hear too much of the same music all the time, and it's not as fresh as they would like. That's some of the fans and everything. But what are some of the things that you hear that you would like to see improved in the music business? And how do you address the folks that are complaining that the music is a little bit too power controlled by a few entities and everything of that nature? So what are some of your responses when you hear those complaints? Because I'm sure in New York City, you hear those all the time.
Well, quite frankly, as far as the gatekeepers, it's never been different. Ever since I got into music in the 60s professionally, there's always been the gatekeepers you have to go through. And the gatekeepers have to, get their pound of flesh and everything. But quite frankly, if people are saying they're listening to radio and just hearing the same old things, they're not listening to the right kind of radio then. Right. Because there's not just a major market commercial radio, which is very narrowly formatted, and they depend on heavy saturation of a few different releases. But, there's also a college radio, which is very experimental and very exciting, and which is some of my favorite radio to listen to online during the workday. And also a place where new artists get exposure first, and which the larger major market stations look as early indicators of who they should be paying attention to. There's also internet radio, which has been around for, I guess, close to 2 decades now. Right. That gives an alternative source of music programming that is not that strict, narrowly formatted. It's more widely formatted type of programming. And there's also satellite radios, Sirius XM, which has a broad spectrum of different channels with different types of music. And so there's really a big selection out there if you take the time to find it. If you just flip onto your local major market station, it's probably going to be pretty boring, pretty homogenous, and nothing that you haven't heard before. But there's plenty of new stuff out there. What I would change about it? Basically nothing. I like the beast the way it operates already. I understand it. I don't try to change the rules. I play by the rules, and the way it works now, I understand it. Everybody's got to get fed in this business, in this world, and so having that understanding and having that acceptance of the way the system works, I'm happy with the way it's working now.
Now, that makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned the different forms. I know one of the things that I do, in addition to working here on the Streaming Podcast Network, is I work with a community radio station named WCOM. And so there are a lot of community radio, low power radio stations that are out there. Mm-hmm. While they might be low power in the sense of not going that far signal wise, they also then become internet radio stations. Yes. Because most of them have internet outlets to what they're doing. So their immediate broadcast radius might be very limited. I mean, they're basically like radio size wattages if they're 100 or 200 watts. But once you add the internet, then they're global. So that I would agree with you that has opened up so much global audience to so many even small stations. Because sometimes these are in very small places, like the one that I'm part of is in Carrboro, which is on the outside of Chapel Hill, North Carolina. But I've heard of them being in even small parts of Vermont, small parts of Providence, Rhode Island, and a lot of places that you wouldn't even think of having a radio station, period. But they do these small community low power radio stations.
Right. Very, very true. And, you know, really with the community stations, I mean, the community stations are a very important asset to any community. They function as a hub where people can find updates from their local news broadcasts about weather, school closures, events in the area and everything that the major networks won't cover in their area. So yeah, they function and have a valuable, they're a very valuable asset to the community. So
Oh yeah,
big fan of community radio.
Yeah, no doubt about that. One of the things I was going to ask you, not so much about that whole radio thing, but just about your own history and everything, was that were you the one that as a young man always knew that you wanted to be a musician and get into radio, or is it something that developed later on in your life and you just followed it for these many decades now? Or was it something that your own parents way back when thought that man's going to be a musician, or is it something that came to you later in life?
Well, to be honest with you, my parents kicked me out of the home when I was around 15 years old because I wanted to pursue music as a career. And that just wasn't done in the 1960s. I mean, that wasn't appropriate. The mantra that they tried to sell me on was basically you need something to fall back on. And so around, I guess, you know, my mid 15th year, we just kind of came to the end of our relationship, and without any kind of kisses or farewells, I left home and went out on the road and began to earn my living as a musician, which was tough, but it was a great thing to do. I'm so happy I did it. I'm so fortunate that really I grew up in a time when it was probably easier to make a living as a musician than ever before, because in the 60s, we used to joke all you needed was a guitar to get a record deal, which at least in my case was true. Certainly didn't have the talent, but I had the guitar, I had the long hair, and the button, the tight jeans. So you know, I could shake it and make it quake and everything else. So I got my first major label deal at 16 with Decca Records, and from there on, just kept on moving up. Eventually, as most people did back in that day, and hopefully they're not doing it as frequently now, as my hearing began to go, I guess, by around the 1970s. So I lost the high end of my hearing, which would kind of forced me out of, first I stopped performing, but then I went and several years and worked as a record producer. But, always having your head in between the speakers in the studio with the volume turned up to the top, to 11, as Spinal Tap would say. It basically shoots your eardrums out after a while. So from there, from record production, I went into music publishing. From music publishing, after several years of that, I guess around 1984, I developed Mia Mind Music, my current company, and provided promotion and marketing services at that time. I had two business partners at that time. One was an entertainment attorney. The other was a senior vice president over at Polygram Records. And we just decided it was a prime time, since the major labels had lost the script to the plot when it came to artistic development, to develop a company that could sell artistic development services. And luckily we were correct.
Yeah, it sounds like a great career and definitely done a lot of amazing work and everything. What's one of the things that if somebody was going to break into doing the more production end and the promotion end of music, similar to what you were doing, you would encourage folks to do? Like, what's the one mistake you feel folks make when they're trying to be the next Stevie B?
Well, to be Stevie B, it's a hard thing, but to be their own producer or to start their own career in production, it's really very simple. You want to be in the record business, go out and make records. Don't sit around and wait for someone to give you an opportunity to make a record. Take your own money, raise money, go out and start making recordings, then hire entertainment promotion and marketing companies such as ours to get the word out that you're making these recordings and to get them on the radio and press coverage. That's the way the major labels will hear about you, and that's the way they'll eventually contact you. You really are not going to pick up a phone and reach anybody in the label and sell to them. They'll find you. They'll see you out in the charts. They'll see you in the press, and they'll see that you're not signed to any label, and they'll see you're already making an impact on your own, and they'll decide you're a good bet to put their resources behind.
And one of
That's
the other
step
things,
one.
yeah, now, can't wait to hear step two. But one of the other things I was going to add to that was I've noticed that a lot of folks have also been, historically speaking, I'd say over the last 15 to 20 years, finding more regional kind of markets. Like I said, I'm here in North Carolina, which is home of both Merge and Mammoth Records. And they found one artist, like you said, whether it was Super Chunk in one case or some of the other ones, and they kind of developed that regional brand, but then it became a national brand. So is that something else that you're seeing more and more people doing, is creating that regional brand? Because a lot of folks know about Merge and they know about Mammoth, and they've now had, I want to say they just recently celebrated their 25th birthday.
Well, the problem with your question basically is this, is there's no answer unless to provide to you that's accurate unless I know what your goals are.
Right.
So if your goals are to try to be discovered by others in the entertainment industry, the answer is no. The answer is you need really a national approach for that, because you're not going to rise to the threshold of getting that kind of coverage to attract their attention if you just focus regionally. And quite frankly, since in the music business, particularly in radio, there's a limited time you're going to stay in rotation at a station. So if you're starting in one region, let's just say traditionally we look at the United States of having 4 different regions.
Right.
If you start in just one region and work that for like 4 to 8, maybe 12 weeks, and then go to the other region, well, you're already starting to die out in the one region you've worked while you're starting to develop in the next region. And so the point is you never get to that level of having enough impact during a given current week to pop up on the BDS, the Media Base, the FMQB, the NACC survey charts out there, which is what the guys and girls in the entertainment industry are looking at on a weekly basis. And if they're not, they're putting their interns to that task to check out who's impacting on those kind of charts, who's getting that kind of coverage, and who's not affiliated with any kind of label. And that's when you get the call.
Gotcha. Yep, that makes a lot of sense. One of the other things, and you just referenced it by mentioning the girls in the industry and everything, and I was just wondering, you are definitely a male in the industry, as am I and everything, but do you think that there's enough of a push to get more minorities and women involved, or do you think that that's something that needs to be improved on as we're here in the 21st century? And of course, everybody's dealing with so much that's going on in the world, both the pandemic and Black Lives Matter and a number of other things. But do you think we're doing enough musically wise in terms of reaching out different groups and even different orientations?
Well, I don't think that really there's ever been a lack of participation of various races or based upon sex. All throughout the decades, there's always been massive impact by females in the music industry. We wouldn't have the whole urban format of music if it wasn't for the African-American input throughout the years, from jazz to R&B to working over into soul and to getting rap, hip hop. It's always been the push there. Now, whether everybody has been getting an equal cut of the pie, that is the concern. And no, the answer is not everyone has been. But again, my experience in the business is that's not so much just cut down racial lines or cut through on sexual lines there. It's really based upon your business salve about how well you're going to get treated business-wise at the end of the day. And you've got to be basically ruthless. To get to the top, you got to climb it tooth and nail. And I'm sorry to say, there have been a lot of times I've done things throughout my career that I'm not particularly proud of. And I haven't been kinder and nicer and more generous. But luckily later at this late life stage of my life, I'm trying to correct that. But so a lot of it's just really, artists make the mistake many times of taking the first deal that's put on the table. And that's foolish. You shouldn't do that. I mean, I learned that the hard way by getting burned on a couple of deals. But I also learned another important fact that if you want to succeed in this business, you have to be willing to give away something. And that is typically, when I first got into the business, you typically gave a cut to your producer, your record producer at the label. He got signed on as a co-writer, even if he never wrote a note of the music. You gave 50% of your publishing up to the music publisher. You were always giving something up. And a lot of people these days still run around with the myth that, oh, no, you never give anybody anything until they pay you for it. And, if I hadn't given up something, my percentages, a fraction of my percentages, I would never have gotten the foothold that got me to where I am today. So it's always a trade-off, and it's always tit for tat. And you have to be willing to negotiate and trade. And you also have to be willing to, not just jump on the first deal, because if someone's offering you a deal, the next step, and the way I've always played it, is you try to start a bidding war. And you go to the companies that aren't offering you deals, and you let them know through whatever source possible that, hey, I've been offered this by Decca or by Warner Brothers. Do you want to maybe have a meeting? And it does wonders when you when you get that offer to use that as a bargaining chip as opposed to just the only deal in town to sign.
Yep, that makes sense. Who are some of the kind of like folks that are your peers that you really admire? Like I said, I know I'm a big fan of Quincy Jones, and of course, I was a big fan of Prince when he was living. But who are some of the peers that are currently out there in the business that you admire, both as producers and as promotional people?
Just about everyone. I don't buy into this idea that, people are bought and sold in this business and that, crappy music makes it. I'll tell you what makes it, hands down, and it has always been necessary in the form, and that's work ethic. Anybody who makes it, anybody who succeeds, works their tail off. No one's given anything out there. Everybody is just relentless in what they're doing. And, I've been married and I've divorced 3 times, and it's all because of my career. It's never been because of running around, gambling, or, other things like that. But it's always been the thing, well, you work too darn much. Well, yeah, well, babe, you spend too much, which always was not the right thing to say, but,
Right.
But the truth being is you have to really just have that work ethic that this is as important to you as your next breath of air, as your next meal, as your next sip of water. If you're not in the business, you're not living. And what I find that I'm a little bit discontent with artists these days, and it's not fair because of the lockdown now, so it's not really applicable, but for many, many years prior to lockdown, is the feeling that many artists feel they don't have to go out and perform. And I just don't live by that concept. I live by the concept that you can't create effectively in a vacuum. And even in the days when I was performing, I might have 1 paid gig a week, but the other 6 nights a week, I'd go out and play jam sessions. I'd sit in with bands at their performances, and I was learning all the time, and I was getting better and better and better. And I was developing, in ways I could not have done it just sitting, waiting for that knock at the door. And so many artists that have come to me over the years have the attitude, well, I don't want to go out and perform for 1 or 2 people. They've already imagined what color the limo is going to be when they get to buy that. They already imagine how the crowd's going to sound at Madison Square Garden. But you know what? You don't go out there and do those empty house gigs, those 1 or 2 people in the barroom gigs. You ain't ever going to get up on Madison Square Garden stage. At least I believe that.
Now that makes a lot of sense, and I know that even here in Durham, there's 2 great jazz programs, one at Duke and one at North Carolina Central University. So I do see a lot of our jazz musicians doing what they call woodshedding. So basically they're going out and saying what you're talking about. They're practicing on the small gigs, and they're practicing in like those kind of gigs that might not be paying them all that much money, but they're constantly practicing their craft, sometimes even doing it at their home. So not even always doing it in a gig environment. And I know that that's actually how they stay on top of their game. So I think that some of the musicians, I don't want to stereotype, but some of them do get caught up in that factor of not wanting to do the woodshedding and keeping up their chops and everything.
True. Well, I'm going to have to book off in like around 5 minutes. Is there any other subjects you want to touch on, or anything I can provide?
Yeah, just really quickly before you bounce off and everything. And I knew that I only had you for a limited amount of time. I'm so glad you were able to pop in and share a little bit of your stories. But if folks were interested in getting in touch with you, definitely, how would they reach out to you, and how would they learn more about what y'all are doing at Mia Music and everything? So if you can tell folks how they can reach you, I'm sure that they would love to hear that. And if you want to leave us with one more story of a famous musician that you've worked with, I'm sure that my folks at IBM TV would love to hear that as well.
Well, there are 2 ways to reach me. One is by telephone. We have a nifty thing called a toll-free number, and that's very easy to reach us. And that number is 1-800-843-8575. I'm available to speak to people Monday through Friday, 9 a.m. through 5 p.m. Bear in mind, we're located in the New York City metropolitan area, so that is Eastern time. So if you call me at 1-800-843-8575 during those hours, you will more than likely reach me and be happy to see what we can do to assist you. The other place where you can go and get a lot of information, as well as all of our contact information, is our website. And the website is www.miamindmusic.com. And Mia Mind Music is spelled MIAMINDMUSIC, all as one word for the domain name. So just go to www.miamindmusic.com or information about our services, email contact, that toll-free number is listed there, mailing address, and that's the best way to reach me.
Sounds good. And like I said, if you wanted to share one more story about some of the folks that you've worked with, and you've worked with so many amazing folks, I'm sure that folks would love to hear that as well. And I'm also going to bring in another one of my guests and everything. And I think that they're involved in the arts world as well. So glad to have Addie Banks with me and everything. So definitely, Stevie, if you'll share a little bit about one of your powerful stories, because like I said, whether it's working with Madonna, working with a number of the other artists, I'm sure that our folks would love to hear about some of your past background in terms of a story that you might want to share.
Well, this is a story about not a very famous artist, but a most unusual artist. Years before I even worked with Madonna, I was producing records for local artists in New York. And one artist I worked for was a gentleman who had a fascination, no, an obsession with sea shanties. Sea shanties are work songs that sailors would sing on ships to coordinate their work ethic of pulling the ropes or raising the mast with stuff in rhythm to the song. He was completely obsessed with these. His name was Sailorman Jack. And I taught him, I used to be a guitar teacher in those days, and so I taught him how to play guitar, and which was how I found out about his obsession with sea shanties. So I taught him nothing but sea shanties. I would learn sea shanties and then teach them to him. And eventually he started performing locally and was getting quite a following, and he wanted some recordings to sell at his performances. So he hired me to come into the studio to produce an album's worth of material with him, which I was happy to do. And he had a great love for the art form and everything. Sailorman, though, wasn't the most talented musically. And by that, I'll relate the story of one time I wanted him to clap along with the track, and I wanted to multi-track it, so we built up the claps as percussion. And just to clap, basic 4/4 time on the 1, and the 3. And I showed, I gave him an example. I did the claps for everything, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, etc. And he looked at me and said, well, I think I'm going to have to go home and practice that. Well, there we have it. And he did. The next session, he laid it down. But I've never had anybody have to practice how to hand clap. But there you have it.
Had to practice the hand clap. That's just amazing and everything. So definitely glad that you were able to join me. Like I said, I know you've got to bounce off. If you want to share just one more time before I get into the conversation with Addie and everything, some of those famous artists that you've worked with, like I said, I know you mentioned Madonna and Luther, but if you want to drop some other names of folks that you've worked with and things, I'd love to hear that as well.
We've worked with Ava Cherry. We've worked also with L.A. Star. I've done work with Master P, Murder Mook, through our distribution branch. We've done work with 3-6 Mafia, Little John, on and on and on. All these wonderful gold and platinum records come from a lot of those people.
Sounds great, and I'm glad you were able to join me, Stevie B, and I definitely look forward to having more conversations with you, and anytime that you want to pop back in and share those stories with us, we're always welcome to have you here on this platform on IBM TV. You were full of great stories, and I definitely enjoyed having you on. Sorry you had to wait a few minutes while I was waiting for that other Zoom conference thing to end and everything, but I was definitely glad to get you on and to have you share your stories and your thoughts on the music industry.
Well, it's my pleasure, and always happy to revisit with you.
All right, sounds great.
All right, take care now, Mark.
All right, bye. All right, so I'm going to bring in Addie as well. How are you doing, Addie? We've just been having all kinds of interesting conversations and all kinds of amazing things going on. So tell folks a little bit about what you've got going on in your world. Like I said, it's the online dinner party. So far I've had a Zoom conference that I had earlier. So I had a chance to talk to Linda Lowry through a pre-recorded conversation that we had yesterday. And then, of course, Stevie B, who is a well-known music producer and all of that. And now I've got Addie Banks. So share with us a little bit about what you've got going on in your world so folks can learn more about what you're doing, and folks can learn more about your whole mission in life and all of that.
Well, I thank you very much for this opportunity. When you get a certain age, you think, okay, I've retired. But then something happens and your life starts over again. And that, I think, is going to be my testimony. I have worked as a social worker, a case manager. I've owned a couple of businesses. I have taught sociology. And I started a nonprofit, Read Seed Inc., to address children who did not own books, because my background acquainted me with the fact that children who have books in the home achieve academically regardless of race, ethnicity, family, socioeconomics. So I said, well, I can do that. I can make sure that every child in public housing in Durham and some other counties builds a library of new books, age-appropriate books, every year. I retired.
Mm-hmm.
And then I discovered Black American history.
Wow.
And I got excited. It's sad to get your history in your old age, but the wonderful thing is that it works at any age. When I started researching Black history, a whole new world, exciting world was presented to me. Because I guess people are kind of concerned about Black history. I offer, you want to learn Black history? Well, slavery and Jim Crow. Well, I have a podcast, and I started out by saying, if all you know about Black history is slavery and Jim Crow, you don't know Black history. So I have established a podcast, No Black History Podcast. It's 1 year old. And I just share wonderful truths about our people. And I tell you what, if you and your audience is looking for a quick cure for understanding who we are, race pride, and just good education, you need to learn some Black history.
No doubt about that. Definitely got to learn some Black history. And actually, as you were saying that, I was thinking about two things that happened earlier today and this week and everything. But I was actually, a good friend of mine who's actually appeared on our network here is a guy named Brian Shulman and Tim Sohn. And they do a thing called What's Up Wednesday. And they had a young lady from Virginia. And she was talking about that she's going to create a YouTube channel. And part of her YouTube channel is going to be to give the youth their voice, because she's feeling that the youth aren't having enough voice and everything. So she's going to create a YouTube channel. I think Raquel is her name, but it's going to be basically giving the youth a chance to put out their voice in their own words. So not necessarily having it told to them from older folks or folks that are like their parents or grandparents' age, but they're actually going to do that. And she's going to be creating that in the very near future and everything. And then I was also thinking about the fact of, as you were talking, all these icons that we've lost and things along that line, because we've lost like Skippy Scarborough here in Durham. We've lost like John Lewis on a national level. We've lost a lot of other icons like that. And then the last thing that I was going to put in that same kind of context was the Zoom call that I put into this show in terms of a pre-recorded segment and everything was with Linda Lowry. Linda Lowry was 15 and was one of those young walkers that was walking on the march from Selma to Montgomery. And she's now in her 70s, but that's one of those stories that they've turned into a play called Turning 15 on the Road to Freedom that they're doing now virtually, but trying to get it national whenever we get out of this pandemic in terms of going to different places. But those are the kind of stories, because I even asked that to one of the educators who was on the Zoom call, was the fact that those are the kind of stories that we don't hear enough about. We always hear here in Durham, most of us in Durham know Merrick Moore. We know the founders of Black Wall Street. And nationally, we know the Malcolm X's, we know the Martin Luther Kings, we know the Harriet Tubmans, we know the Frederick Douglasses, and the people of that nature. But I don't think we know enough of, say, the Pauli Murrays. Yes, she does have her own house, but I don't think we know enough of the Pauli Murrays. we definitely don't know enough of the lesser soldiers in terms of the slavery movement and the civil rights movement and things of that nature. So the fact that you've got this podcast that brings some of these stories to light is a wonderful thing. So what are some of the things, as you learned history yourself, and you even said that you learned it later in life after having worked in sociology and other things, what are some of the stories that you found in your research and in your doing a podcast and just in terms of being involved that shocked you, that you didn't know, and that you learned more about it, you were glad that you knew about it, whether that was here in Durham, because of course we're based here in this area. Our founders of IBM TV are in the Raleigh-Durham area, most of them, but then we're a global platform on IBM TV. So we've got folks that are watching from Malaysia, South Africa, and other places. So what are some of the stories, both globally as well as locally, that you learned that really shocked you?
There are so many. Let me tell you, let me skip back. I got into exploring Black history, and then I was offered an opportunity to have a radio show, an organization, Every.Black,
Right.
with Jimmy Davies. I met him at a meeting, and he said, you know what? You're into history. Would you like to have a radio program? Hadn't thought about that. But I started a weekly program on early Black businesses because his platform was about business. And then the door opened where I discovered slaves who, when you think about it, they were the ones doing the work.
Right.
So they were the ones who developed the skills that many of them used when their owners were benevolent enough to let them make money on the side to buy their freedom and buy the freedom of their family members. We have barbers who became so prosperous that one of them, loaned the governor of the state some money.
Wow.
There are so many stories about Black achievement under difficult circumstances, not just seamstresses, not just barbers, but they turn that skill and tenacity of spirit into empires.
Wow.
See, we don't think in terms of slaves and former slaves becoming millionaires. But Booker T. Washington started an organization that rallied Black people from around the country into entrepreneurship. In 1900, they had their first convention in Boston.
Right.
I tell you, if you want to be inspired, look up that information, because thank God online you can find so many good stories. But one of them that I was excited about was a fella named Groves.
Okay.
And he was a potato, well, he was a slave. And after he got his freedom, he did some sharecropping, and then he bought some land. This was in Missouri, I believe. And so he planted some potatoes and some other crops. He planted some fruit trees, and he started growing fruit. Long story short, Mr. Graves became the potato king of 1902. The U.S. Department of Agriculture named him the potato king of the world because he grew more potatoes than anybody else in the world that year.
Oh, wow.
But he didn't stop. He grew all of those fruits and vegetables, and he exported them around the country and in Canada and Mexico. He grew so many that the railroad company had to put a track on his land so that it would be easier to load his produce and transport it to the out communities. He didn't stop. He invested in stocks and bonds. He invested in companies. He invested in white and Black companies. And of course, many of these people understood the value of owning property. They bought land. They bought land. They were investors. This was in 1900.
Wow, that was all in
I could
1900.
I could tell you 20, 30 stories. Slaves who were slaves and moved to California, slaves there, and then with their freedom, owned most of Los Angeles.
Wow.
There are opportunities to learn about what it takes to be an achiever and a success. And that's what Black history is offering us, offering our families, offering our children, offering the world. Because my other passion is I instruct race relations seminars.
Oh, wow. I definitely want to learn more about that. But before you get to that, because I definitely want to learn more about the race relations seminars, because I know we even had some conversations about that on a number of our shows here on IBM TV. But before we get to that, one of our founders is a woman of, she's a white woman, but she's a woman in everything. But I would love to hear some of the stories that you can share of Black history and strong African-American women, because I know that that's something that I personally am a big fan of. My grandmother actually founded the library in Raleigh, the Richard B. Harrison Library. But I'd love to hear some stories that you might have heard about that folks may not know about, because of course we all know American Moore, but not everybody knows the women leaders and everything. So I'd love you if you could share a story of some of the women leaders that came out of slavery or that came out of Durham history or North Carolina history.
North Carolina history. Okay, I was going to go in another direction. I was privileged. You mentioned Mr. Scarborough.
Yes.
Last year, in the celebration of the 150th anniversary of Durham, I worked with a group of business persons to explore Durham's Black business success. And I got an opportunity. There are about 7 businesses that were founded before 1950 that are active today. And of course, Scarborough and Garget is one of those businesses. Right. And so I had an opportunity to sit with him and his wife, and was so impressed with his knowledge, and such a fine gentleman from that very old school. But I did read about women who owned in 1887, the first directory that Durham put out listed Black men and women who were in business. Wow. In, I think, 1867, there was a Black woman who started a hotel. Most of the business women were seamstresses, and many were, while they were working as maids and cooks, they also had businesses in providing those services. Some of the most prosperous Black women were in the hair care business. Madame de Séjour, you've heard her name?
Yes.
Was one of the biggest employers in Durham during that time. She was a hairdresser, but she also had a school. And then she had a hotel for her students to live in. And then it was a distribution center as well. And to step right a little outside of the area that you were asking me about, if you want to know about outstanding Black women in business, I have a few names.
All right.
Okay. Malone.
Mm.
Annie Malone, first Black female millionaire in America.
Wow.
Who started the hair care businesses that Madam Walker worked for her and got her start. But there's also a woman named Sarah Washington.
Mm.
Both of these women were in hair care, but they had agents selling their products, not just in the United States, but in South America, in the Philippines, in Africa.
Wow.
And this is the 1900s, around 1940. So we have a wealth of history to draw from that is astounding. And it allows us to not have to reach into anybody else's accomplishments, anybody else's history, any other nationality.
Mm-hmm.
We have enough pride and history and achievement to hold ourselves high and say, this is our identity, an identity of overcoming, an identity of achieving no matter what. And I think that's the thing that we all need to wrap our heads around, is we never stopped.
Yeah, that's very
Give it, bring it on, give it to us. We go. And that's why this pandemic,
mm-hmm.
we're going to be reading about the history makers
mm-hmm.
Who made it through and made it across.
Oh, yeah. Definitely. I agree with you on that. We're going to see a lot of folks that are coming out of this pandemic and that have made it across in terms of doing great things and everything. You mentioned that you were doing a lot of work with around race relations and cultural divisions and things of that nature. And I know that that's another big thing that's going on in society. We're oftentimes hearing about Black Lives Matter. And of course, there's the whole thing that's going on with the election of Biden, and a certain person at 1600 that doesn't want to leave his job, even though he was fired, but he doesn't want to leave it and everything. But tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing in the context of race relations and trying to get different ethnicities to work together.
Race relations is the most misunderstood and much talked about topic that I know of. Everyone has an opinion, but what is missing is some fundamental truths.
Okay.
We must be taught how to love and get along with each other. It seems that we expect people through osmosis to have better race relations. I tell people, and I hear people say, we got to talk. It's time to talk about race relations. Okay, so what you going to talk about? We have to learn first. There are some truths and some principles. We throw around terms like race, prejudice. We throw around ideas about diversity. We throw around words like equity. And we have an idea of what they mean, but we don't really know. We have to step back and learn our truth. How did we learn to be racist? How did we learn to be bigots? How did we learn to be indifferent to the needs of others? And that is across the board. So when we talk about race relations, we have to break a lot of rules. We got to throw a lot of myths away. And we have to come to some understandings of how we all got here. I was talking to someone recently, Black person, who confessed that I was in a restaurant and everybody I saw around me was Black. And I got a little nervous. We think that race relations is a white folks problem. Race relations is an all of us issue. And when we come to terms with understanding that we are all members of a group or two, and we look at each other and we deal with each other based on that group affiliation and not the individual that we're dealing with. When we wrap our heads around that, and then another thing that we are ambiguous about accepting is every group puts their group first. Every group helps their group. So when we're talking about race relations, we got to jump off with who's your group and how are you putting them before somebody else?
Wow, that makes a lot of sense. You got to do that and everything. Because I know sometimes folks want to also be engaged in working with other minority groups, be that working with the Latin American groups, working with the Asian groups, working with other like kind of groups, be that women's organizations, be that folks with different orientations and things of that nature. What do you say to folks that want to do that?
I say that it is imperative that we live in a world together. And once we come to terms with our group identity, the very fine people that we love and trust who taught us our bigotry, when we come to terms with looking at the social structure that enforces our bigotry, then we sit down together and say, okay, there's no place for finger pointing, no matter who you are. Now, understanding these truths, how do we create an environment of love, respect, and do no harm? We have to, because Martin Luther King said, either we come together as brothers or we fall apart as fools.
Wow. Yeah, that's a deep quote that Martin Luther King had and everything, and definitely one that we should be listening to more often, because I think that we don't listen enough to our historical figures. What are some of the most important lessons that you can remember, other than Martin Luther King, that our young people and our young activists should learn from their past folks that whose shoulders they step on? Because I know that definitely that's some of the things that, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on Kamala and her election as vice president. But that's one of the things that I know she talked about, was that she was refusing to be, that she knew she was the first in terms of the first female vice president, but she also knew that she wouldn't be the last. And she acknowledged some of the people whose shoulders she stood on, be that folks like Harriet Tubman, folks like Miss Truth, folks like a number of others. So what's some of the messages that you would give to our young activists from a historical standpoint?
Know who you are.
Mm-hmm.
One of the, I came to maturity in the 60s and 70s, and that was a time when we were grappling with identity. Who are you? Mm-hmm. And Black Americans spend a disproportionate amount of time answering that question when they could be doing other things in their achievement agenda. So if we jumpstart knowing who we are by learning from our ancestors, understand, young people, you are so blessed to be part of a group that has built, I call it ADOS, descendants of slaves. And there are other groups, of course, in America, like Kamala's. But we have blessed you with culture, tradition, heritage. When you learn that by listening to your ancestors, your parents, the elders, respecting the old ways and not throwing them away, then you, like every other group in the world, builds on their heritage.
Wow.
And I think that I know that when we visit those people that are mentioned in the video that my daughter sent me today of Kamala mentioning the ancestors and Shirley Chisholm and we have to know who we are.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean that we can't embrace other cultures.
Right.
But moving away from our culture, not honoring the fundamentals of Black American culture, what it does, it makes you a stranger in your own land.
Mm.
And you have issues with belonging.
Wow. Yeah, definitely.
We have to belong.
Yep, that makes a lot of sense. We definitely have to belong and do more belonging, because I know I'm a big fan of our history with Black Wall Street. And of course, Durham had a Black Wall Street, Tulsa had a Black Wall Street. There were a number of others around the country and everything. But I sometimes feel that we have too many business leaders that don't see the potential to create new Black Wall Street. So I was wondering, is also in the business community, do you think that we're doing a good enough job of, one, embracing the history of our old Black Wall Streets, but also creating new Black Wall Streets?
I don't think people know the history. As you said, people know a few names and they know a few buildings. But what I learned doing the research for the 150th celebration is that Durham had about 4 districts of Black businesses and business communities. And on every corner, there was a grocery store. There was a movie theater in Durham, several movie theaters, a hotel, and there were close to 40 service stations owned by Black people.
Wow.
Of course, we had their funeral homes and that, but we had carpenters and electricians, and we all up and down Fayetteville Street and before the freeway. We had businesses that addressed every need. We had a mattress factory. We had factories that hired white people. It was so phenomenal that Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois had to come to Durham to see what is going on, that I have heard so much about this industry in Durham, and they wanted to share it with the world. You know, we had a real estate company, Black real estate company, before 1900.
Oh, wow. That's incredibly amazing.
It-
One of our bosses, Miss Kim Calhoun, was commenting that she loves your bookshelf and she was wondering what books you have in your bookshelf. So she was definitely admiring your bookshelf and wanted to know what books were in the bookshelf. So what are some of the, there's so many books, but what are some of the primary books that you would highlight if you were going to tell somebody about your big bookshelf?
Well, I have this one, The History of Black Business in America. And this is written by a Black woman who taught me to appreciate that before our ancestors got here, they came from a culture of commerce in Africa. So our business achievement was planted in us long before we got here. Another is From Here to Equality. Now, this I think people are familiar with because this is William Darity at Duke, and reparations. I recommend it. It's very, very important. Many of the books are related to Black history and slave narratives and business. And well, you know, I'm always a student. And so thank you for your interest.
You're saying that a lot of those books are planting a good seed in people's minds and everything. So even when they come into the house, they get an idea of good history and all of that. So she definitely said that and everything. By the way, I also noticed that you've got quite a few plants behind you as well. So are those plants that you are growing yourself? Is this another hobby of yours? In addition to being such a great historian, are you also a gardener?
I wish I could say yes. They are not. They are just lovely similarities to real plants, but I love plants. My mother had a green thumb, but I not so much. But I just love the greenery.
Sounds good. One of the things I was curious about is what you mentioned, Mr. Darity, who's actually a relative. I think we're like second or third cousins or something like that. But what are your own thoughts on reparations and this whole reparations movement? I know that that was something that even came up during the campaign, the fact that Biden was open to this possibility. But what are your thoughts on reparations and where will we get it?
Let me look at it. Well, I hope we will get it soon. That should answer one question. Reparations means repair. And when I research our history, you got to be a tough person to read deeply.
Right.
I've been doing research on slave narratives. And if it doesn't break your heart, what our ancestors endured, when you read about them working and acquiring land and the history of the land being confiscated, killed, or taken in other ways,
right.
When you think of those business persons, you know, we would make plenty of money, but we kind of keep it on the down low, because as soon as the information got out about your wealth, then you could anticipate your home being burned, your business being burned. One of my books is about sundown towns. That's you, if you're a Negro, you need to be out of town before the sun goes down, or you will pay the penalty. Sundown towns all across America. That is our history. When you look at that wealth gap, because wealth is accumulated through generations, And many of our people have to start from go.
Right.
Every generation. Not because we didn't work hard and save and do all the right things, but because we live in a system where we are not able to then allow our children to benefit because we live so close to the dollar every day.
Right.
That is no fault of our own.
Mm-hmm.
Repair means asking us, what can we do to set this right?
Mm-hmm.
What can we do in love and consideration for you as a people to put you back, put you on a plane where you can compete with immigrants who come to America with bankrolls and perhaps don't know our history, and we find that they can be just as competitive and lack consideration as people who have been here a long time, discriminating against Black people. So understanding truths and making amends. And that's why reparations, not just a check, but programs that distinguish Black people as deserving and entitled to their heritage. The things that our ancestors worked so hard for that we are entitled to. Yet sometimes people say, well, you just need to move over and share. I believe that love is a two-way street.
Right. Yeah, that makes sense. Love is a two-way street. I know one of the things that Linda Lowry, the lady that was in that whole Alabama area during that time, that she spoke about yesterday was the fact that she would like to see human put back in humanity. And I think that that's something that we also need to have more of, because that's one of her things, is that we need to have that whole concept of the entire of humanity and working together. And she feels that we're not doing enough of that. So that's one of her pushes, is us to put human back into humanity. And I think that's something that is definitely needed. By the way, Miss Calhoun was adding about your bookshelf that she felt that it speaks of your good character, and she wanted to thank you for sharing that and everything. And she also said that you were so right about the system being set for us to fail. So she was agreeing with you on that concept of the system being set up for us to fail. And she would actually argue that it's a lot of the people that are set up to fail, not just those in the African American community or the Latin American community, but throughout a society, since it seems that it's the 1% that control things, and that's not even 1% of the white race or some of the other races. That's just 1% in general. So she would definitely put it in that 1% kind of context. What are some of the things that have as you've done all of this research, and you've done so much amazing research, and I was glad to have reconnected and met you through Eric's Black Business Expo, but what are some of the things that you have been surprised about that you would wish more people knew about, historically speaking? You've shared some of them, but I was just wondering if there was like one thing, even in terms of principles, that you wish more of our folks knew, in terms of principles that they could live by, that you have learned from reading history and some of the historical things that you have heard about.
Oh, that's pretty simple. We come from people of faith. Our fundamental overcoming foundation has been a belief system.
Mm-hmm.
We could have been a people that hated and warred and sought revenge for what we have been through. But as I read the slave narratives, and as I read, I'm familiar with books. I did take a few classes with Dr. C. Eric Lincoln when he was alive and at Duke, at the Divinity School. And what is resounding is our ability to overcome based on a belief system. And that is the same system that slaves, free persons, has perpetuated, that we based what we did, the organizations we founded, the helping that we see so much today. You wonder why Black people start so many nonprofits? It is our long history of being told to give back and uplift. If there's anything that's going to sustain us, and we see it everywhere we look, as we complain about Black people are not helping each other, you're just not looking in the right places. Right. We spend so much time helping each other that other people are making millions of dollars while we're busy helping. Because that is who we are. It is fundamental to who we are. Right. On the slave ships, they bonded across tribes and language and called each other my brother and my sister, like we do today. They said, we are a family. And I'm old enough to remember when a Black person who didn't know me could see me in the street acting up, could have a word for me, because that was part of my family that I didn't know. That is who we are, and that is our strength. Through the history that I have read, there seems always to be that component of faith. Right. Mr. Joe Dudley, hair care, when he wrote his autobiography, he wrote about his faith. He could have wrote about his ability to make money, the relationships he had. But when we read histories of our people, the faith principle surfaces. And the same was true for Harriet Tubman, who one of her great quotes was, I did not know what to do or where to go, but I looked to the God of my being, who instructed me. Our success, and I believe the success of the world, is based on kingdom principles. Right. Love, joy, respect, and do no harm.
Yep, and Ms. Calhoun was adding another thought in everything. She was definitely saying that revenge only establishes divides of which we will never overcome. Endless feuds and wars feed off of it, and she loves the idea of rising above and giving back. So she was definitely saying that she definitely enjoys the concept of rising above and giving back to our society. And I also agree with that as well. One of the things I was curious about is, I know that Jimmy Black with everything Black, that he does it, everything. I mean, Jimmy Davies with everything Black, and a number of other folks that are involved in that organization are about us building up our business community and things of that nature. So are you seeing a lot of new businesses here in Durham and throughout the area that you've been very much proud of? And if so, what are some of those new businesses that you've been proud of and everything? Because I know that there are a number of them here in our areas. I'd love you to tout a few of those that you are personal fans of.
Well, I have too many friends to pick out individual businesses, so I'm just going to be general. One of the things that Jimmy Davies emphasizes is that the civil rights movement was fine for allowing us to sit in a restaurant and order food beside any other person. But today, the civil rights movement needs to be about entrepreneurship.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, that's not a new idea. Martin Luther King had the same idea, that when we have control over our finances, then we have control over our lives.
Right.
And what I am seeing is the entrepreneurial spirit and thirst to express your independence is alive and well, even during this pandemic. That everywhere we look, even if we went to our church and say, well, how many people in the church have businesses? You would be surprised. And not just limited to, making cupcakes, even though, I'm a cupcake fan, but such a variety of businesses and writing books, having something to say. So I can't speak more highly of the spirit of coming together. And that's what Every Dot Black is about. It is networking and promoting businesses and getting them exposed, which is another thing that we have a long history doing. Even out of slavery, we had networks that insurance organizations within organizations. But we have always been about establishing some business to help each other. We're good people.
No doubt. We're definitely very good people. One of the other things we do on the online dinner party, we got us a little bit longer, maybe about another 45 minutes to an hour to go, but you don't have to stick around that whole time. But one of the things we do is we have what we call our mystery guests. And one of those, what it is I give clues and everything. And I don't know, you being a historian, it might not be fair, but for those that are watching, I'm going to stream along the clues of our mystery guests. And one of them is she sued a slaveholder for illegally selling her 5-year-old son, Peter, after the New York anti-slavery law had passed. The legal battle lasted months, but she won her son back. So definitely, like I said, I don't know if we can have Addie play along because she's a historian. She might know that one too well and everything. But if folks are watching, and I'll see if she knows at the end as I roll across or before she leaves, because we've got 3 this time. But the other clue is once she was freed, she moved to New York City and started to working for a local minister. She became a powerful speaker, preaching about faith, speaking about faith and what Addie is all about, women's rights and the abolition of slavery. And she was known for a famous speech in 1851. She delivered her famous "Ain't I a Woman" speech at a women's convention in Akron, Ohio. So that's one of our mystery guests and all of that. So that's, like I said, I've got 3 of them that are our mystery guests that will appear in the form of a picture later on. But she met and worked with plenty of well-known activists in her day, including Frederick Douglass and William Lloyd Garrison. And yes, she did meet Abe Lincoln. So definitely that is one of the things she said. And definitely she had this great quote that I love, which is, "Truth is powerful and it prevails." Truth is powerful and it prevails. So like I said, that is some of our mystery clues. We have another one that does not come out of the world of the African-American community, but comes out of the world of celebrityhood and all of that. And then I've got one from overseas. But another quote she had is, "Religion without humanity is very poor human stuff." And I definitely agree with her and all of that. So definitely that is a great quote that she had. And another one is, the rich rob the poor, and the poor rob one another. And last but not least, she said, I tell you, I can't read a book, but I can read the people. So that's some of the quotes of this great historical figure out of the African American community. So definitely that is one of our folks and everything. So I'll be revealing some of the clues of the others as well. Addie is just shaking her head because I'm sure she knows that one just all too well, who that person might be. So I will ask her at the end, but we'll see if any of our guests and folks that are reading comments and making comments and watching in live play, because we have team live and team replay. And of course, you can't get the clue in team replay because that just means that you can go fast forward. So one of the rules is you have to do it during the live performance of the show. So it has to be within the 4 to 7 hour on Wednesday at the online dinner party that you give me the correct answer, because otherwise that's called cheating if you go back and get it in team replay. So definitely we'll go ahead and give that. And I will give some clues for our historical figure as well, including some stuff that folks may not have known about this particular person. But one of the clues is she had a stutter, which although not very severe, was still pretty noticeable. So it is somebody from the world of entertainment that had a stutter and all of that. And her grandmother was committed to a hospital for mental disturbances on August 4th, 1927. She died 35 years later, plus 1 day on August 5th. And fear of going mad, like that, like what happened to her mother and everything, is part of the reason that she was concerned about her own life and all of that. So definitely it says the fear of going mad like her grandmother and mother would haunt her throughout her life. So that is one of our folks that is a celebrity, from the world of Hollywood and all of that. And she was sent to an orphanage when she was only 9 years old. So she was sent to an orphanage when she was only 9 years old. And last but not least, in terms of the clues for that one, and then of course we got an international one as well, and that was while married to her first husband, Jim Dougherty, when she was only 16 years old, they would stay married for 4 years. So definitely, and she had some quotes too, and I love this quote that this particular Hollywood person had, which is, fear is stupid, but so are regrets. So fear is stupid, but so are regrets. So you got to love that word from this famous Hollywood person and all of that. So, this one is something that I know many people, including myself, when I have my procrastination moments, can relate to. She was notorious for always being late. And once she became successful, her behavior became very erratic. For when she would show up to work, she often would cause everyone else to wait around for her and all of that. So definitely that is one of the clues that involves her. And the directors who worked with her, they knew her, or even if they and they worked around her, and even if she would show up, because they never knew when she would show up, they would just shoot around her. So that's some of the folks that folks may be looking for. And Tony Curtis had a famous line about our other mystery guest as well. So his famous line is that it was like kissing Hitler, and said that that was spoken because of how difficult it was working with her on that famous film, Some Like It Hot. So that ought to give it away who that person is and everything. But definitely think about it. That was one of her films, Some Like It Hot. And she was fired from the last movie she worked on, Something's Got to Give, because of her erratic behavior. So that's some of the clues about our famous person and all of that. So definitely all the folks may know about her background and all. And we'll even have one that might be a little on the blue side as well, because apparently she was known for going around a little bit in the buff and all of that. So that's a little bit on the blue side, the clue that you're seeing going around on the screen now. But definitely that's a little bit about one of our folks. And the New York Times, unfortunately, and on a sad note, reported that in the weeks following her death, they saw the number of suicides in New York reaching a record high of 12 a day. So that's one of our celebrities from the world of Hollywood. So I don't know if Addie knows that person from the world of Hollywood, but I'm sure she knows the African American person with all the quotes and all of that. So let's see if she knows she's shaking her head like I don't quite know the one from the world of Hollywood at all, but definitely I'm pretty sure she knew the historical figure from the African American community that I was referring to. And we'll just keep, and I've got one other clues that I'll reveal later on, but we'll see if anybody can figure out who those two folks are and everything. Two strong women, one that is from the world of Hollywood and one from the world of civil rights in the early days after slavery and during slavery and all of that. So definitely, I'm thinking folks may be able to guess who these folks are and all of that. So we'll wait and see if anybody gives me a comment and if they know who those answers are. Sometimes they surprise me and I find out that they know the answers. Sometimes people, even within the show, know the answer, but we'll just have to find out if anybody is going to be bold enough to come up with the right answer. But right now, I'm going to go back to Addie and learn some of those great lessons that she has learned as well. If you had to say that there was a philosophy, an Addie philosophy of life, not just a historical philosophy of life, but an Addie philosophy of life, what would you say your own personal philosophy of life is, and what do you do in order to encourage that philosophy of life?
Be confident, but be humble.
Right.
Recognize that we are all gifted. Recognize we all have purpose, but recognize that we can do nothing by ourselves.
Well,
we are empowered through a power that is beyond our understanding. And we all work to love. I depend on a Bible and God's word. And if we could summarize the purpose of the Bible into one word, that word is love.
Right.
We have been asked to do one thing: love God, love ourselves, and love each other.
Right.
That is what I wake up every day wanting to serve, because that is what gives life meaning.
Yeah. Powerful words and definitely a very true statement. Is there any particular, either in a book, whether it's a motivational book like some of the things that Martin Luther King wrote or Malcolm X wrote or Frederick Douglass, or even within the Bible, are there any particular passages that you use as kind of like your guiding thoughts or your guiding ways to live life every day? If there's a particular, either a quote from a famous person or a particular passage within the Bible that's your go-to passage?
I look to different people, different historical persons for direction and guidance and inspiration. But it is the Bible that I must return to. And one of the things that sustains me is knowing that no matter what your situation is, God is able to bring you through it. The other thing is that when we surrender to love, then we win peace and joy.
That makes a lot of sense. That makes a whole lot of sense. We definitely have to surrender and get that joy from above and everything along those lines. And definitely I can agree with that. Now, is there a specific psalm or proverbs that you always find to be the one that you always go to? Like, I know some people are big fans of Psalm 23. Other folks have certain proverbs that they really enjoy, but are there any particular ones that touch to you on a daily basis?
I would have to say the 23rd Psalm, because it encapsulates what we experience every day. Though we walk through shadows of evil, and though we feel downtrodden, and though we feel that we are alone, none of it matters, because in the end, God is with us. Our rod and staff, our comfort. And if you believe that, then elections, Pandemics, storms are just incidents along the way that we, for all the days of our lives, there will be a God that gives us what we need.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. What do you say to the folks that are watching the elections and all of that and are concerned about the way that it's been so tumultuous? It took us a week to figure out, or a little bit less than a week, to figure out who the winner was. And now we're still trying to have the person currently sitting in the office get out of the office. But what do you say to folks that are watching this and watching the race divisions around the country that are happening, and the blue versus the red in terms of Democrats versus the Republicans, and just the division that seems to be happening throughout this great country of ours? What do you say to those folks that are watching this and are concerned about it?
It distresses me because a nation divided will fall. A people divided cannot build love and connection. We see so much negative every day. A couple of years ago, I decided not to turn my television on. And I have not had a television for several years. Because we get to determine how much negative we consume. If we are confronted with negative thinking, negative speech, then we become a nation of negative behavior. So I am concerned about how we're going to come together as a nation. I'm writing a book called Homeland that came about because you don't know my family's military history. But my father was in the military for his entire career. But he joined, he was a Tuskegee Airman. He didn't fly, but he was part of that group.
Right.
But before he became acquainted with the military, I had uncles who were also in the military. There was a member of my family who fought in the Civil War. My husband, my son, my brother, my cousins, my grandson have served in the military of the United States of America. This is a country that means a great deal to me. I think it is one of the, don't want to use the word best. I think it is one of the countries that is established on principles of humanity that draws people here from around the world. And what I'm seeing when I look around is that for political reasons, people are willing to sacrifice what this country stands for. So to answer your question about the election and all that is going on, groups that are rising up to burn office buildings, it's troubling that there's not a platform where we can come together as Americans, a nation of immigrants, but also a nation of natives, and say, what is important enough for you for us to come to a meeting of minds, regardless of our politics, regardless of our ancestry, regardless of our group affiliation? How are we going to fix this? Are we going to let this become America's failed history? That is what I pray about.
Wow. Yeah, that's some deep prayers and prayers that are definitely needed and everything. I know one of the things that this network has done, IBMTV.tv, which, like I said, was founded by Kimberly Calhoun and Nick Palmeda, is that's part of the reason that they created the platform and this internet TV station was they found, because at least one, if not two of them were involved in network media, and they found that too often it was, if it doesn't bleed, it doesn't lead kind of mentality of our news media. So they wanted to give the voice to those that had stories to tell like yours and others that we've had here that weren't necessarily the kind of like blood and gore and sensational kind of stories. So they want to give a chance and a platform for folks to have their stories shared and all of that. So that's one of the reasons of them creating this platform, and for me trying to help them grow the platform as much as we can, because we do find that a lot of folks too often, whether it's Fox or MSNBC or ABC or CBS, they're concentrated on the sensational elements, even if they're covering storms and covering other things. It's too often the sensational elements of those stories and not the down-to-earth human elements. So that's part of what the whole purpose behind the network was to create and give folks a chance to have their voice heard. So definitely, I know on behalf of Kim, we love hearing your voice and definitely hope to hear more of it in weeks and years to come and everything, because definitely you lend that kind of voice that we love hearing here on this platform.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Definitely, I agree with you. So right that too often we hear folks that are not talking about these kind of powerful stories and things of that nature. Could you share a little bit more about it? You kind of alluded to it, about your relatives' role in the Tuskegee kind of experience, because a lot of people don't necessarily know about the Tuskegee Airmen. I mean, I have sometimes brought it up here on this network because I feel that part of the reason that we as a people are not excited about vaccines. We want a vaccine, we want a cure, but part of the reason we're not excited about vaccines is because many of us remember the history of Tuskegee and the experiments that went on with that as well. So we're a little bit cautious, for lack of a better words, because we want to make sure that everything is tested and tested right. But at the same time, we know some of that past history, whether it was Tuskegee or whether it was a number of other experiments. Some would even argue some of the AIDS experiments that were going on in early days and early trials. So could you talk a little bit about what you've learned from your own relatives' experiences with the Tuskegee situation and kind of that history lesson that you might give to our global audience about what was going on with Tuskegee?
Well, everything that is related to Tuskegee in my family history has been positive. My father, who grew up in Asheville, was accepted at Tuskegee, went off to college there, and while he was there was the call for service. And so with the history of Tuskegee Airmen and training and Booker T. Washington being a dynamic leader who opened the doors for Black success, more than just a college education, but a principle of work, getting your hands dirty at work. Because when you read his story of slavery and sitting on a dirt floor to eat and not having a last name, then becoming the man that he became Tuskegee. Right. And the airmen and the other support staff, they were all called Tuskegee Airmen, men and women. But a few of them flew planes, but a lot of the others were able to be support, and many of them, like my father, remained in the service after the war. My parents got married at Tuskegee.
Mm.
So that is the other little piece that is exciting for me, that there's that connection. There's a picture of my mother sitting under the statue of Washington and the slave that is so poignant. But Tuskegee is important for a lot of reasons. Tuskegee is the place where Carver made a name for himself, Dr. Carver. And I might throw in that my father met him. He was on the campus, and I think he walked into the wrong door, and it was the lab, Carter's lab. And so I think they just sort of looked at each other, and my father turned around and came on out. But it's a story that I can tell today. But Tuskegee was a place where innovation, never saying we cannot do it, became a symbol to the world. Excellence. Students represented because they were from Tuskegee. So it is a part of our history that we have the syphilis studies and the different pieces to the history that we point out that should be known,
Right.
but have been part of the atrocities of Black people's experience in America. But yes, there's a place in my heart for Tuskegee.
Sounds like it's got a very special place in your heart. There's no doubt about that. And definitely where you were, folks met each other. So that's always going to be a very special part of anybody's life when they find out where their folks met and how they met and all of that. What are some of the other...
Let me clarify that. My mother was a Shaw woman.
Okay.
They met through her brother was in the military, and he was such a fine man. He says, I might allow him to meet my sister, but they did get married there.
Right.
But my mother was a Shaw woman through and through.
Could you talk a little bit about the history, the importance of Shaw? Because a lot of times our global audience doesn't know the importance of Shaw, and I know that that's a very important African-American institution as well. And of course, that's over there in Raleigh. But a lot of times folks don't know about the importance of that great institution. A little bit about your thoughts on the importance of Shaw University as well.
Shaw is representative of that period in Reconstruction that sometimes we gloss over when we talk about historically Black colleges and universities. When we read about the histories of these universities, when we read the names of white men and women who came south and did more than talk about civil rights and education, they pledged their lives to educating Black people. They worked with Black people in the community. Let it never be said that we were not participants. But Shaw was one of those, the first in North Carolina to be established. Now, folks in Georgia have claimed that they were the first in the South at Morehouse and Atlanta University. But for a long time, Shaw was seen as the first HBCU in the South. Shaw had a football team. Shaw had a medical school. Shaw had a law school. Shaw was a proud and innovative school that graduated many, many people that you would be surprised that they went forth and made a name for themselves. My mother tells me about her experience as an undergraduate at Shaw. She said everything just had to be so particular that they learned, part of the people may not be aware, part of the reason why they established universities in the South was to, quote unquote, teach Black people the fine points of civilization and etiquette, so that as educated people, they can go out in the world and have the skills of people who claim an education. So with that in mind, stories that my mother told about at meals, they would take turns monitoring the table. And so at the table, there would be service. They had the right numbers of forks. They even had a finger bowl. They were taught how those who are supposed to be educated live and enjoy a meal.
Wow.
She said that when they went to town, walking into Raleigh, downtown, they had to have their stockings and their heels. It was a time when to be distinguished as an educated person was also a time to be distinguished as a person with grace and etiquette. But yes, when we look at the HBCUs and the many brilliant people that came out of them, then we hold our head up high at our achievements.
Yeah, no doubt. I know that both of my parents graduated from HBCUs. They both graduated from Central and everything, North Carolina Central. But I have one aunt that recently passed that went to Shaw, and I have aunts that went to other universities that were, and cousins and others that went to some of the HBCUs. My younger brother got his bachelor's from Central as well. So those HBCUs have definitely played an important part in my family, even though I went to one of the PWIs, the predominantly white institutions at Marquette, but I do have family members that went to the HBCUs and know the importance of them in our college system and all. So definitely they play an important role. Who are some of the, we talked about a lot of the historical figures and some that have crossed family members past, but who are some of the historical figures that you personally have met that you would like to share with our international audience that have inspired you when you met them? So I'm thinking that maybe you met John Lewis. I'm sure you've met Reverend Barber, but who are some of the folks that have inspired you that were historical figures that you have had the pleasure of meeting?
Wow, that's one that I had the opportunity to meet Alex Haley in Atlanta when I was a student at Atlanta University. And we had a chance to talk about his book, and he signed the book for me. A very impressive man. I have also met Dr. John. See, I'm old, so who is the historian?
John Hope Franklin?
Yes, John Hope Franklin. I have sat with him, and at that time, I had the nonprofit, and I always ask people the question, what role did books play in your home? And he shared with me that his father always had a book with him. That when he had a chance to read, he would take that chance, even if it was just for a few minutes. And he remembered that about his father and appreciated that. And that helped develop his own love of books. Dr. C. Eric Lincoln, I don't know if people know him, but he wrote extensively, and he and I became very good friends. He introduced me to many concepts for success. But I think most important, he showed me what a friend could be.
Wow.
A man who is world renowned, a man who was known internationally, who would take the time to work with a graduate student, to go beyond, to be invested in my learning, taught me about a lot about humility. Ben Chavis, I met him. He's from Oxford, and so am I. Well, Oxford is the closest town to where I'm from. And so he and I knew some of the same people, and had a chance to meet him and talk with him a little bit. I really am kind of a person who, if you don't come to my house, we probably are not going to meet each other. I'm not out and about. And so while I have had the opportunity to meet people in passing and maybe even in conversation, it isn't really something that has been a big center of my life. Yeah,
that makes a lot of sense. I'd be curious to know which town you grew up in, because I actually grew up in a little town called Warrenton, so I know about Oxford and Henderson and everything, because Warrenton is one of those small towns as well. Now, if you only could go and got taken to a beach property and you could only take 3 books with you, what would those 3 books be? Like, you got that extensive book collection, but you're only allowed to take 3 books with you. So what 3 books would you go? And I'll be fair. I'm gonna let you take 2 pieces of music with you as well. So 3 books and 2 pieces of music. What would that be?
Okay. Because my husband was married to one of the Temptations, my husband was a cousin to one of the Temptations, then I'm going to have to take something that from them. I guess the other piece of music would be the William Tell Overture.
Okay.
I love classical music. And of course, if I could take also Handel's Messiah.
Okay, we'll let you get away with 3. So we'll do 3 and 3. So we got to give the 3 books.
You know what? I have read extensively, and I read for pleasure.
Right.
After college, I said, I just want to read for pleasure. Let me tell you what I'm reading now.
Yeah, please do.
Maybe that would be better. I have discovered an English writer named Wilkie Collins.
Mm.
I never heard of him before, a few months ago. But I found his books online, or ebooks, and I have been fascinated. Fascinated because here is a man who was writing during the 1800s, but he writes relevant to today. He has written books that speak of racism,
Mm-hmm.
speak of sexism, speaks of systems, discrimination, and class systems that I am drawing from. My background in sociology has inspired me to use his books to write treatises about today.
Wow.
It is informing materials that I will be using in my workshops on race relations. Now, of course, yes, I do look to those classics, and another writer during that time named Charles Chestnut.
Mm-hmm. Maybe Charles Chestnut.
I am reading now one of his novels about Conjure Woman.
Yeah.
A North. And if you have read that, I tell you what, a man who was an attorney.
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think, he was the first to pass the bar in I think Cleveland, Ohio. Black man.
Good.
And the way that he has written Conjure Woman is just amazing that this comes out of this distinguished gentleman's knowledge. But I also read the book he wrote on the Wilmington incident, the insurrection. I love Zora Neale Hurston. I love her work. But, yeah.
Those are all some amazing authors and some great authors, no doubt about that. And I want you to tell folks how they can reach you, and also when the race workshops will be available and how they'll be available. But then the other thing I was going to ask before getting to that is, what advice would you give to folks that want to write history or do the kind of work that you are doing, be that race relations talk, be that being a historian, be that the social work and sociology work? What advice would you give to folks that might want to follow in your footsteps?
I'm not sure I have footsteps that merit being followed, but what I will say is, ask yourself one question: who am I? And when you're answering that question, you start writing down what you know about yourself. As a mental health therapist, one of the things that was difficult for my clients was, tell me about yourself. Folks can tell you about their children, their mama, their cousin. They can tell you about their neighbor. But when it comes to tell me about yourself, well, what do you mean? What do you want me to write? Get to know the only person that you have to live with for the rest of your life.
Yep. That makes a lot of
Get
sense.
to know that person. What do they like? What do they think about? What makes them cry? What just knocks them right off the chair? What do they really, really find funny? Get to know that person and then explore the people in your family.
Right.
Not just your grandma, but go to ancestry.com and find out who you come from. It's free.
Mm-hmm.
And then that may take you off on another journey. I found, and I grew up, well, I didn't grow up, but I was born near Virginia, Virginia, in Granville County.
Mm-hmm.
And so I found that my people were Saponi Indians.
Hmm.
So then you research the history of the people
Mm-hmm.
that you came from. And just for yourself, just for fun. This
yeah.
is just for you. Nobody has to read it, ever. But do that for yourself. So I guess that's the best answer I can give you for that.
That makes a lot of sense. And I've actually got some family members that are Halawa Saponi. So actually, my cousin Verna runs a dance studio up in Holliston, North Carolina, the Raven School of Dance. So I know that area quite well because I've got family members throughout Hollister and that whole neck of the woods. So know that Saponi tribe quite well and know that whole area. So definitely can agree with you on knowing your heritage. That's an important part of what we need to know on a regular basis. So couldn't agree with you more and everything. Did want to get to finding out for the listeners that are watching how they can get in touch with you if they want to learn more about your podcast. So if you want to give them the podcast website as well as how they can reach you about the race relations workshops that you're doing.
Excellent. You can reach me by going to ASB_marketing@yahoo.com. I have a website, ASB History. But the podcast is KNOW Black History at patreon.com. I have a race relations course, 5 lessons at Udemy, UDEMY.com. And it's the course, understanding race relations in America. If you complete that course, not only will you learn some things about yourself, you'll understand what race relations is, how we got here, how we participate, and then you'll be challenged with the question, can we get along? Mm-hmm. I think that's one of the challenges for people in teaching race relations. There is an assumption that we can get along. I'm not convinced that people have the desire to get along. Because when you get along, that means you've got to give something up.
Hmm.
You have to defer to somebody else. And there are folks who say, you get yours and I'm going to keep mine. And if we can't come to an understanding about entitlements, then can we get along?
Interesting question, and I don't be interested to find out the answer to that from folks taking your course and everything, because I do know that a lot of folks are trying to figure out whether we can get along. I'm of the opinion that we need to get along, but whether we can actually pull it off, then we're gonna have to work in true unison in order to make it happen. We can't just give it one side having the advantage and the other side being at a disadvantage. It's got to be coming at it from a point of equality, and that means understanding our history, them understanding their history, and us both celebrating each other's culture. Meaning we have to celebrate our culture, they have to celebrate their culture, and yes, we can celebrate the cultures across the boundaries and everything, be that white cultures, black cultures, Latin cultures, and everything else. But I do think that we need to come at it from a standpoint of equality and of true equality, and not one of one group being advantageous over the other. I'm going to go ahead and play the game one more time. We got one other clue to give, and I'm going to throw those banners one more time. And like I said, I think that Addie will know this, and I'm going to come to her since nobody is going with the answers and see if she knows it after we run a couple of the more of the clues for the person that is dealing with the African American society and African American culture and everything. But one of her quotes is, "Truth is powerful and it prevails." She also said, "Religion without humanity is very poor human stuff." And then last but not least, actually, we'll give a couple more. "The rich rob the poor and the poor rob one another." So that is what this famous person said, that comes out of the world of struggles within slavery and all of that. She also had this one that I found very interesting, which is, while there is so much racket, there must be something out of kilter, or where there is so much racket, there must be something out of kilter. I think that twixt the Negroes of the South and the women of the North all talking about rights, the white man will be in a fix pretty soon. So the rest of the quote is, "We'll be in a fix pretty soon." And then along the lines of women's rights as well, this person said, "If women want any rights more than they've got, why don't they just take them and not be talking about it?" So if women want any rights more than they've got, why don't they just take them and not be talking about it? So I think she was ready for folks to actually be straightforward and going right to the core of what the issues were and all of that. So that's some of the quotes that came from this great leader. And like I said, they did have the pleasure of working and meeting with various dignitaries of that time frame. And in 1851, they delivered their famous speech entitled "Ain't I a Woman?" at a women's conference in Akron, Ohio. So like I said, nobody is taking the bait or anything. And I'm going to give one last one that I gave earlier, but they sued a slaveholder for illegally selling their 5-year-old son, Peter, after the New York anti-slavery law had passed. The legal battle lasted months, but she did win her son back and everything. I actually had the pleasure of being involved in a play that involved this person's life in the town of Princeville, which is an African-American community. So I remember some of these stories being shared by my friend Rudy Wallace, who was out of Raleigh and did a play based on this particular person's life as well. So before we get to the other clues, including my Hollywood starlet and my person from overseas, and since nobody is biting, I'll give them another minute or two, and it doesn't look like anybody's biting. Ms. Banks, do you have any idea who that might be based on those clues? And then I will put up the picture of that person based on your answer and everything. But you heard a lot of the clues. I know you're a historian, so I'm thinking you should know that one right off the top of your head. But do you have any idea who that famous historical figure was?
I certainly do. But before I give my answer,
Yes.
let me just share that one of the most famous things that she said was, "Who is my savior?"
Mm-hmm.
And in answer to the "Ain't I a woman and men's rights over women's rights, she pointed out that her savior was the child of a woman and her God, and man didn't have nothing to do with it. So she made that point. Another thing I will say is when I read the story of her life, after working so hard all her life and saving and investing, she became a victim of a swindler who took all of her savings.
Wow.
Miss Sojourner Truth.
That is right. That is Miss Sojourner Truth. No doubt about it. Miss Sojourner Truth. There's the picture of her on the screen, but Addie Banks is correct. That is Miss Sojourner Truth, was one of our mystery guests today. So you are so right. That is Miss Sojourner Truth as one of our mystery guests. So Addie Banks was right on point. As I was giving those clues and seeing her smile, I was like, yeah, I know that Miss Addie is going to know that one without any doubt in my mind and everything. Not so sure about the more historical Hollywood person and everything. And we got one more that I'm going to bring up as well. But let me give some of the clues of our Hollywood person, and that is that she was known to have a stutter, which, although not very severe, was still pretty noticeable. And she was also known for having some things around mental illness in her family. So her grandmother was committed to a hospital for mental disturbances on August 4th, 1927. She died, this particular person did, 35 years later, plus 1 day on August 5th. So she died at that particular time frame. And of course, the fear of going mad like her grandmother and her mother would haunt her throughout her life. And she was married to her first husband, Jim Dougherty, when she was only 16 years old. And they would stay married for a mere 4 years. She also had that quote that I love, which is, "Fear is stupid, and so are regret." So she's had that particular quote and everything. And on a lighter note, or not a lighter, a more harsh note, she attempted suicide for the first time, or at least it was the known first attempt, after Johnny Hyde, I believe was an agent, died in December of 1950. She was also notorious for always being late, apparently even on sets and things of that like nature and everything. So definitely they say that the directors would follow around her and all of this. And this one may help Addie get it, because Tony Curtis's famous line, "It was like kissing Hitler," was spoken because of how difficult it was while he was working with her on that famous film, Some Like It Hot. So she was a member of that film, Some Like It Hot. And she had a desire to be taken as a more serious actress. She worked with acting coaches throughout her career to improve her craft. So a lot of folks may not have known that about this particular person and everything. And no, it was not Donald Trump, apparently, but a New York businessman did buy a film of her for $1.5 million. And apparently it wasn't our current president, but some other rich person and all of that. And last but not least, I'm not going to put out the name because then everybody will get it, but her initials are NJM to her real name. So a lot of folks may know her as Norma Jean. So Addie, do you have any idea who that might be as well?
Miss Marilyn Monroe?
You have got it right. That is Miss Marilyn Monroe is our other person and everything. So we will pull up a picture of none other than Miss Marilyn Monroe. So there is Miss Marilyn Monroe, which was our third person that was the clues and everything. So there is Miss Monroe under one of her famous poses and all of that. But yes, Marilyn Monroe is our second mystery guest. And we've got a third one. And I had not revealed the clues for this one. And this one might be a little bit more difficult and all, because it comes out of the world of contemporary politics. I will tell you that this person is known for being compared to none other than that person currently at 1600 that doesn't want to leave 1600 and all of that. So doesn't seem to want to leave that area, but is known for being in that area. So he was born in Brazil. That's right. This particular person was born in Campinas, Sao Paulo, Brazil on Monday, March 21st, 1955, and was first elected into the Chamber of the Deputies by the Progressive Party. And remember, their ideas of progressive and our ideas aren't always the best or the same thing. He is best known for his far right and populist politics and agenda, which has been compared to none other than that of Mr. Trump. And one of his quotes is, "I prefer a prison full of criminals than a graveyard full of innocent people." And he also said, "I believe that a strong man makes a strong country." So these are some of the quotes of this particular person. They also said, "Every honest citizen, man or woman, if they want to have a weapon in their homes, depending on certain criteria, should be able to have one." So that's some of their quotes. And then they also said, "It doesn't matter what the color of your skin is, your sexual preference, the region where you were born, your gender, we're all equal." So these are some of the quotes that they had. They also had some quotes that I'm sure folks might not find as friendly or as nice, because one of their quotes was, "I have 5 children. There were 4 boys. The 5th, I got weak and a girl came." And they also said, "If I were racist, I wouldn't be so crazy as to declare it on television." So I think they were actually speaking to that person that's currently in 1600 and a question that was posed to them. And last but not least, they said that they are in favor of a dictatorship. So that is one of their quotes as well. So definitely don't know if you can guess who that person is or where that person might be from. Do you have any ideas who that might be as well, Miss Banks?
I do not.
Well, that is going to be the Brazilian president. That is right, the Brazilian president, Mr. Bolsonaro. And folks have compared him to a similar style of being almost like that person currently at 1600. As a matter of fact, I know a young lady here that lives here in the Term area where I'm at, near the apartment complex that I'm, well, in a different part of the apartment complex where I'm at. And she's actually told me that he might even be worse than the person at 1600 because of some of the things that he has said. But his name is Jair Bolsonaro, and he is the current president of Brazil. And yes, folks say that he is as bad, if not worse, than the current person that we've got in our office. So that's who our folks were, is the Brazilian president, Jair Bolsonaro, none other than Marilyn Monroe, and all of that. And I will bring up a picture of Mr. Bolsonaro, including one with the more standard politician picture and one with him carrying a mask. And by the way, like our president, he also caught the virus. So he did catch the virus and I think is on the road to recovery, but he was one of those world leaders that did come down with the virus. But here's the stance of him just being at one of those podiums like many of a politician. And here is one of him wearing a mask. So there's a picture of him wearing a mask and all of that. So that is Mr. Bolsonaro and what he is all about. We'll get ready to wrap up the show. And one of the things we always do toward the end is we let folks give a thought of positivity, something that they would like to share with the audience, something that they would just like to leave the world. Like I said, I do know that we go all over the world, places like Malaysia, where one of our my fellow co-host is at. So Sharif is probably even watching at this hour. Ankit, one of our producers, is in India. Alexandria May is in South Africa. So we've got folks throughout. Ben Coach, who pops in as a guest but doesn't have his own show, is out of London. So we've got folks that are watching from throughout the world, and those just some examples, because I know that Brother Mike is over there in Nigeria. So what kind of words of encouragement, words of hope would you like to share with our global audience as we get ready to wrap up in the last few minutes and everything?
You're asking me?
Yes.
Love your homeland. Your homeland produced you. Your homeland nourishes you. Your homeland belongs to you. Protect it and cherish it.
Yep, that's very good messages for our folks from throughout the world. Too often, I do feel that too many of the people of the world don't cherish their own homelands and things of that nature. So you're right, they need to cherish it. And I would think that you would also argue they need to understand the history of their homeland as well, because a lot of times we're too busy wanting to learn the history of other parts of the world or other cultures. And while that is important, we definitely want to share learning other people's histories. It is also important for us to know our own history as well. We know that as a people, that is something that African Americans and even I would argue Native Americans haven't always done a great enough job of doing, is celebrate our own history. One of the things, and I'd love to hear, since we got a few more minutes, Ms. Banks' thoughts on this, is one of the things that I've always been glad of is my cousin that I referred to that comes out of Hollister is a member of the powwows that go around the country and celebrate that part of the culture. So we talked a lot about the African American part of history, but I'd love to hear your reflections on powwows and their importance to our Native community. Because like I said, I'm sure that my cousin Berna and others that participate in that would love to hear your thoughts on the importance of powwows and sweat lodges and other things that come out of the Native culture.
I have not attended a powwow. I have not celebrated that part of my heritage. But if someone asks me, who are you? My answer would be, I am a double Native American. I am a product of the Native Americans who are indigenous, and I am a native, Black, descendant of slaves, only known in America, native to America, my homeland.
Yep, definitely an important part of the homeland and everything else. Speaking of homeland, and you referenced it earlier, if you've got another minute or two that you can share your thoughts on our great music that has come out of our culture, because I am a big music fan, a fan of jazz and blues, and you mentioned being a fan of classical music, but can you talk about the importance of jazz and blues and some of our music that has come out of our culture?
Oh, one of the podcasts, 1 month I spent a good amount of time on the banjo and the guitar. And the banjo goes back to Africa, but we express our music because we express our soul. And to understand the men and women who brought banjo music and introduced jazz and introduced blues. Oh my goodness. It is music that has changed the world.
No doubt about that. It's definitely music that has changed the world. And I'm glad that you were able to share that with our folks and everything. And this has been a tremendously great program. I was glad to have you on, Miss Banks. Glad to have met you, like I said, once again and reconnected through Eric Kelly's Black Business Expo, but then also having Stevie B sharing his knowledge about the music industry and all of that. And then, of course, through the wonders of pre-recorded stuff, we heard from Miss Lowry, who also shared a lot of history as she was there on the walk from Selma to Montgomery at the tender age of 15. She was one of the youngest people, and I had the pleasure of meeting and talking to her yesterday along with some educators. So I shared a little bit of that before you and Mr. Stevie B got on the air. So folks are always getting good history, getting good culture, learning about entrepreneurs and activism here on this station on a regular basis. So definitely glad to have y'all all on. And as I was telling Stevie B, I would say the same thing to you as well, Miss Banks. You know that you are always welcome to come back on. We actually do on Thursday mornings, Thursday afternoons between the hours of 11 and 1 o'clock. So it's part morning, part afternoon, a show called Podcasters Thursdays, in which we celebrate the podcasters of the world, and they get a chance to talk about podcasting in general. So that's another program that exists here. Isn't as much of a general conversation, and it's more specifically focused on the world of podcasting. So I'll be passing your information on to the folks that put that on, and who knows, they may invite you to come on that show as well if you have some free time during those hours. And another show that comes on right after Podcasters Thursdays is The Gamers Den. So I'm gonna let folks check out what the Gamers Den is all about, as well as one of our political shows, and then we'll have this airplane to get on out of here, which is the way we usually end things. But check out what the Gamers Den is all about.